shop is our work, and the lettings of the rooms, the partnerships with the universities, and the scaffolding which you see outside is perhaps our biggest achievement today. That's provided by Bath and North East Somerset Council. Listen, this is a superb turnout for Andrew Heaven's conversation about his new book, The Prince and the Plunder. I think anyone who has read it will have very much enjoyed it. It was great. And if you haven't got your copy, they are on sale now. The author will be happy to sign them at the special introductory price of £20. I think we're set for a lively conversation. A couple of thanks. I'd just like to thank Ras Benji, our new operations manager, for all the preparation in setting this up, which is a lot. I'd like to thank Chris and also Pauline for the lunch which you've had. Pauline was meant to do the introduction today, but she looked at me and said, "You haven't done anything, you do." And I would just say that the nephew of the author observed to me it was the best curry he'd ever had. I'd like to thank Index, who's arranging our live stream. It's a great help to have that in really professional hands. And welcome to our remote guests. I have to thank Cressida for suggesting this. It's all her fault. Thank Felicia and Mulugeta, who are the interlocutors or the provocateurs. And then I'll hand over to our author for today, Andrew Heavens, for a conversation about his book, The Prince and the Plunder.
Thank you very much, and a very good afternoon to you all. We meet at home to a conquering line of the tribe of X. And we are celebrating as much a prince who is the son of a giant's couple, Tewodros. And this book, The Prince and the Plunder, I was there when it was first launched, and I was, I think, the second person to have it autographed.
Yes.
Which is a great thing.
I can vouch for that.
Couldn't have come at a better time. It kick-started not only interest, but campaign to get back the looted items that are gracing museums and homes in the United Kingdom. Andrew Heavens is no stranger to Ethiopia. He's lived there as a reporter and a journalist, nor is he a stranger to Africa. Lived in Nigeria.
My parents met there, yeah.
Your parents met, and so you were born in Nigeria?
Almost.
Almost born in Nigeria.
I was born in Bromley, but almost, yeah.
Fantastic. This is fantastic. So without further ado, I'm going to sit down and ask Andrew to tell us more, to brighten our interest, and so that out of this will not only come out the sale of his book, but the interest to demand the repatriation of the remains of this prince, who to many Ethiopians is none other than a prisoner of conscience. Now, there is a law in this country that not a prisoner of conscience, prisoner of war, I wanted to say. In this country there is a law which says museums cannot keep human remains for more than 100 years. He's been here more than 100 years. Not in a museum, but buried in a palace. So we want him back for the good of Britain and for the good of Ethiopia. I think he deserves that. Over to you. And Engineer Fasaha will come now, and he will be leading the question and answer session. For now, thank you very much, and have a good day.
Wow, thanks very much. This is amazing. I wasn't expecting anything like this, so thanks for everything so far. We could end it here and it would be a huge success. Probably better, actually, but we'll play on. I'm conscious that I'm sitting here, a boy born in Bromley, surrounded by people who are experts in everything I've written about. So I really don't want this to be a talk from me. I'd like, if we could all cooperate, if we could make this as much as a discussion as possible. So if you could interrupt me within the first 5 minutes, that would be wonderful. Just keep on interrupting me with questions and counterpoints. If you disagree with things, if you think I've got something totally wrong, or if you just want to add a point, I'd be entirely grateful, because I am feeling imbalance of power here. You know, I've written a book, you know all about it. There's one thing, I'm conscious that I think there's a minority of us in this room that may not know the basic story. Can I assume that you all know it, or would anyone like to have a go at giving the 1 minute sub-Wikipedia summary of the story of Alemayehu? Shall I have a go? Or?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to get this wrong, so you can jump in straight away. Let's start with King of Kings Tewodros II, a giant in our shared history, who forcibly reunited Ethiopia after a period of turmoil and had great dreams of, as a great Christian monarch, reuniting and having alliances with other great Christian powers across the world as equals. Remember, this is before the great scramble for Africa, before what we now know as the British Empire and the German Empire and the French Empire. In a way, everything was up for grabs. He had dreams that he could forge an alliance between himself and his equals in the world, the other great Christian monarchs. One of those monarchs was obviously Queen Victoria of Britain. He wrote to her. He forged a very strong relationship with the first two major British figures that turned up in Ethiopia, Plowden and Bell. And without going into details, these great hopes expressed in the poetry of his statements and the poetry of his letters, through a series of misunderstandings and events and disasters, crashed into disaster. And the relationships between Britain and Ethiopia reached a nadir when Queen Victoria, he wrote a letter to Queen Victoria offering friendship and an exchange of ambassadors. It appeared that she ignored him because there was no reply came to that letter. For a succession of other misunderstandings, he became increasingly angry, increasingly paranoid, increasingly worried what Britain was up to. He imprisoned pretty much every European on his territory apart from, let's say, the majority of Europeans on his territory, including missionaries and envoys and proto-diplomats. This was finally woke Britain up because it couldn't stand this insult. It was trying to maintain its status in a world where it had India and was desperately trying to keep hold of India. So it couldn't be seen to be belittled by what it saw as some petty African monarch. So it got together this vast army recruited from British India and Britain, essentially charged up in the highlands of Ethiopia, defeated Tewodros' forces with hugely superior weapons, freed the prisoners. The British soldiers were quite annoyed that the British prisoners seemed in quite good condition. They'd been expecting to rescue some torture. Good condition. Tewodros, it turns out, had looked after them pretty well. But anyway, freed the prisoners, had one last charge onto the top of Meqdela. Tewodros took his own life rather than face the humiliation of defeat. British troops then rampaged across the surface of Meqdela, grabbing the treasures that you referred to earlier. And that left them with a dilemma. Most of Tewodros' followers had gone, but there was his family, his young wife, and one little boy, 6-year-old Alemayehu. So the British said, well, what are we going to do? We can't just leave them here. They thought that Alemayehu might be murdered by Tewodros' successors. So they picked up Alemayehu and his mum and charged out of the country. Alemayehu's mother died on the way back, leaving just the little boy to go back to Britain. So they took him in a matter of days after all that turmoil, after his life had exploded, and plonked him on the shores of Plymouth, pretty much exactly 155 years ago today, give or take a week. So, my book tells the story of that early failed romance between British and Ethiopia, between Britain and Ethiopia, the violence of the attack and the looting of Meqdela, the loot that was brought back, and the little boy that was brought back. And we won't go into his full story, but he landed here in Plymouth, and not to give away too many spoilers, he lived the rest of his tragically short life. Not all his life was tragic, but it was tragically short in Britain, with a few other excursions. So that, in a nutshell, just in case you didn't know the basics, that is what the book's about. And it tries to tell that story. There's been a lot written about the military campaign because there's a big industry in military history in Britain. There's been a lot written about Tewodros just because you can't ignore Tewodros, he's a giant, in both Ethiopian and obviously mostly in Ethiopian, but also in British history, because he had a lot to do with our relationship with Africa. and really stands up as one of the first people to challenge Britain in its imperial charge, in the years building up to its imperial charge. But very little has been written about Alemayehu, and I think for the basic reason that we're talking about a 6-year-old boy who among us at the age of 6 had written a memoir, stood up and had his say, left a mark on the world. You know, as a young child, you don't leave much of a mark on the world. So that's left a dilemma for historians. How do you tell the story of a little boy who didn't have a chance to tell his own story? So that's what I've tried to do by stitching together what I've found, and that's hopefully what you read in the book. And there's so much in this story that I thought today, so we're not just talking for the rest of the week, I would do a boiled-down version of the British Museum's History of the World in 100 objects. We're going to, most of those are stolen. We're going to do a history of Alemayehu in 10 objects, which we're going to whip through. First of all, did I get anything wrong? Does that sound,
No.
Is that the basic sub-Wikipedia?
But he was not only boy, there were others.
Yeah.
What kind of way was this?
And their descendants, the other children, their descendants are here today.
There was not only one boy.
There was Meshesha and...
Dr. Martin.
Sorry?
Hackmorgan or Dr. Martin.
Yeah, there were many other children as well. Yeah. So not only from Tewodros' family, but one of the things I was surprised to find out is that this was not the story of one child. The British have Tewodros back with them. If you checked the boxes and the baggage and that came back, there were children stashed all over the place. And their story is even more desperate in the fact that there's almost nothing left of them at all apart from a few mentions in surveys and that kind of thing. So if anyone out there is a better historian than me, and that is everybody, please go and try and find the other children, because they must still be here. Their traces and their descendants must be still around us. Okay, that's the story in a nutshell. I want to start by an apology. That I think there's one big misleading thing about my book, which is the fact that it's published by a publisher called the History Press, which suggests that this is a story about history, which suggests that this is a story about something that happened a long time ago, which suggests that it has nothing to do with us, that it's out of reach. You know, William the Conqueror, cavemen, you know, history, how interesting, nothing to do with me. I just want to get that, this shouldn't be a history book, this should be a story about us now, because Alemayehu is just out of reach, he's almost within reach, you could almost touch him. If he was here today, he'd be 162, which, you know, isn't that old. But the great Ethiopian British poet Lem Sisse measured the distance between us and Alemayehu as 2 grandfathers. That's not far. We could almost touch him. Just to show you how close he is to us. This is Alemayehu, who by general consent was born on St. George's Day on 23rd of April 1861. And this is him later in years, I think in rugby. In possibly one of the most photographed people from that era. If you just go to Google and type his name in, you can follow his story just by looking at the pictures. So that's Alemayehu, born in 1861. Anyone recognise this lady? This is Princess Victoria of Hesse and Bahrain, also known as Victoria Mountbatten, also known as the Marchioness of Milford Haven, also known as the granddaughter of Queen Victoria. She was born just 2 years later on 5th of April 1863. So as good as you want, the same age as Alemayehu, contemporaries. I found out where she wrote, as a child I played at Windsorcastle with Prince Alemayehu, son of the Emperor Theodore of Abyssinia, who was being educated at Eton. He died young. He wasn't educated at Eton, but he did die young, so she got half of the story. But anyway, here we have, we're talking about 2 contemporaries. They both look like figures from history, quite along the way. Alemayehu, as we know, died tragically young, as she said. She did not die tragically young. She lived a good long life. This is a picture of her in 1949-ish. She lived long enough to sit next to Britain's Queen Elizabeth II at the christening of the little baby Prince Charles, who is there in swaddling clothes. As obviously we don't have to say our current King Charles. So I found this mind-blowing that Alemayehu, if he had lived a long life, and he would have, there's every chance he could have done, but we all know he didn't. He could have touched King Charles, who is with us today. So I just wanted to get, let's forget, this is not history. This is us. We can touch him, we can relate to him, we can reach out to him. Writing his, as I say, writing his story had many challenges about how to write about someone who left so little behind him. Actually, as I did more and more digging, I found out that it's not quite true that he wrote nothing. I've found up to 5
he's obsessed with royalty, and he's got a collection of Tewodros and Alemayehu related things. And he just opened a page one day and showed me this, which explains what many of you may think have been. I don't know how many of you read this book and thought that I've made a huge spelling mistake throughout by spelling Alemayehu's name A-L-A-M-A-Y-U. We all know that's not the conventional way of spelling it. The reason I chose to spell like that is because that is how Alemayehu wrote it. At the bottom of all his letters, he writes A-L-A-M-A-Y-U. This was from this is the first object which I got hold of, which really made me feel that I've connected with Alemayehu. You can see that this is, he came and landed in Plymouth. Within a matter of days, he was put on a steam train, whizzed across the British countryside, and introduced to Queen Victoria in her holiday home, Osborne House in the Isle of Wight. And he spent his first year in Britain in a succession of houses and one big stately home, similar to this one actually, called Afton House. He was then whisked away to India, but before he left, his guardian, the wonderfully named, everyone knows his name?
Speedy.
Captain Speedy, the best named Englishman in history, was his guardian. But he sat him down and said, there are lots of people out there who are obsessed with you. Can you write loads of autographs? So he sat, poor Alemayehu one day, by this stage, probably 8 years old, sat down and wrote his name out again and again and again. And you can see as a little boy writing. Remember, he would have just learned to write in English a matter of months earlier. This is the copy plate handwriting. I used to have to try and write like this. You can see the guidelines that he was writing between. Did anyone write like this when they were children at school? Yeah. And you can see, maybe look, either he's blotted there or hasn't quite connected the L and the A. This little boy. And the first thing I felt very pleased with myself when I found this. I thought, aha, I found a trace of Alemayehu, and I'm going to make a point by saying I'm going to spell it like this because this is how he wanted to spell it. And he got so few choices in his life that this is how I'm going to have it to honour his choice. Blah 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 blah. And I had a whole paragraph along those lines. And then it occurred to me that there's a reason why Alemayehu was taught to write his name like this. Because I'm guessing that this is the easiest way to transcribe his name if you're an English person. So this is an English version of his name that he was taught to write. He had no alternative. He was fluent. He read Amharic as a boy, but from what we can tell, he gradually lost that as the years progressed. So when I look at this
word, this bit of writing, I feel connected with Alemayehu, but I'm also reminded of the distance that we have from Alemayehu, that essentially everything we know of him, pretty much, even the things he wrote, were through a barrier or a filter of the British society he was in. So even when you can feel, I've touched him, I've got him, even his own handwriting was the English version of his name, which is much easier for me to pronounce than Alemayehu or whatever it is. So no. Object number one. There are many out there. Did anyone remember the fuss a few years ago about the lock of Emperor Tewodros' hair that was found that had been on display in the National Army Museum?
Yes. And
was returned among great fanfare. It turns out, and I was going to say Victorian Britain, but actually I think thinking about my own childhood and my own self, British people have an odd thing with hair. Yeah. That while Alemayehu was writing his name out again and again and again. Captain Speedy or someone like that was also behind him, chopping off little bits of his hair to send out as mementos to all his fans and interested people. Because I found, so this is a bit of a scoop, but later in the year someone has found a lock of Alemayehu's hair as well, which was sent out in a letter to a relative, just as a period of history. And I found references, there are at least 3 locks of Alemayehu's hair, and from that I can presume there must be lots of them out there. So in terms of objects and traces, Alemayehu is not only there through our memories and stories and his descendants, and through his influence on both our cultures, he's physically there. He's dispersed in Britain, and curious people were. So Alemayehu is out there. This is one object, but it kind of symbolises bits of him that are everywhere. Like there are bits of Tewodros that are everywhere. His hair, his blood in various museums, his clothes that were ripped off his body. This story is in our air and surrounding us. Anyone like to interrupt, or shall I? Any questions?
Can I just come in at this point, because I was actively involved in the return of the lock of hair.
Yeah.
The thing started with the reply from Her Majesty, the late Her Majesty the Queen, to the then President of Ethiopia, that the remains of Prince Alemayehu was in a catacomb along with 40 others, and it would be very difficult to exactly pinpoint. And the late Professor Richard Pankhurst, suggested that if we had lock of hair, DNA can identify it easily. Yeah. So from that day on, I'm talking about Ethiopian calendar 2000, 15 years ago, we've been searching the whereabouts of the lock of hair. And after a wait of 12 years, we finally pinpointed.
Yeah.
The arguments that the custodians had was that it was in the British culture that wives of soldiers wore the hair of their husbands when they went to thing. Our thing was to display part of our emperor who died and he wasn't killed is a disrespect to Ethiopians.
Just so that it was in an exhibition, it was in a glass case.
It was in a glass case.
It wasn't a hair, it was an image of the hair, wasn't it?
No. The actual hair was in a cage, right. And they immediately, the custodian of the museum happened to be married to an Armenian whose dad was His Majesty's goldsmith in Ethiopia, and he's been telling him that Ethiopia doesn't care about objects of the past, about history, about this and that, because he knew what the revolutionary Mengistu Haile Mariam has been doing. So he said, even if we give you this, you wouldn't keep it in a proper place and so on. Our argument was, first and foremost, remove it from public, and then we will talk about the repatriation.
Yeah.
We wanted it to be buried alongside, but the actual aim was to see if there was any possibility for a DNA. Okay, at that point, one of the things that was raised was, can we get a descendant of Tewodros? So I'm just going to come to that point.
Yeah.
And then I remember many years ago, at the Jazmach Casa, coming to my father's home. My father at the time was the president of the Crown Council. He came shaking like this. And he said, how could this happen to me? How could the grandson of Tewodros not be made a Ras when a patriot like Amora Wuwilach becomes a Ras? And my father calmed him down and he said, let me go and speak to His Majesty about this. And he went, and I don't know what happened after that. So I had that, and I approached my older brother who's in Germany, who, just like you, is a writer from Ethiopian history, recently wrote about the emperor himself. And he said, I know his descendants. His grandson is here. He gave me a telephone number, and I approached him. and he said, I asked him for two things. The first is, would you be happy that we receive it from the museum? The second thing is, will you be able to come and join us he said, we would have loved it, but we are occupied. Give me time, give me 2 weeks to consult with other members. Little did I know that the lady who is here today is a descendant. Had I known that, I would have contacted. And he said, we are all happy for them to give it. And that's how it is done. So to cut the long story short, if in fact St. George's Chapel, Windsor said, in every coffin there is a label, and I'm sure Prince Alemayehu's label is there.
Yeah.
So whether you like it or not, your book has kick-started interest in the repatriation. Now, if you know, after this book, 2 or 3 times, it was in the news that Buckingham Palace has refused.
Yeah.
Who asked Buckingham Palace is a mystery to me. Does anybody know who asked? Nobody.
The British, I think.
And you know, even their descendants cannot ask Buckingham Palace. It has to be state to state. And already something is in the process, and the children, along with the Ethiopian community, a long worldwide petition, can ask King Charles III if he could allow it. You know, if it is a matter of cost to exhume it, that's another matter.
I don't know.
Yes.
Fantastic,
Yes.
really pointed very. Quick interruption. Apparently someone parked by their garage, a car KM6 to WVS blocked someone. A black Peugeot, is that you? Oh.
Thank you, that's it. I just wanted to enlighten you on that.
Can I please ask,
Yes.
what is the status now of the Lock of Power in Ethiopia? Has it been buried? Where is it?
That's a very good question.
Can you repeat the question?
Yes. Where is the Lock of Emperor Tewodros II today in Ethiopia?
Thank you.
All right. Let me ask you. That was the first question asked by the Army Museum. They insisted that we should have it in a box. What will be on the box, they had to decide. And we suggested that we provide a box, velvet box. On top of that box should be the current flag of Ethiopia.
No.
Huh? Sorry, this is the agreement. Because the current flag. But underneath would be a Lion of Judah.
Right.
Okay, so what I had was, I bought a shamma and asked someone to embroider a Lion of Judah. After that, they said, how is it going to be transported? We had the Minister of Culture here to officially welcome it. I was asked to go and see that in the box was the hair that I saw being displayed, which I guaranteed, then ceremoniously came and presented it to the minister, who then took it to Ethiopia and was presented to the people officially, and it stayed there for a year and a half at the newly refurbished museum, Addis Ababa Museum. After that, it was transported by air to Gondar. From Gondar, it was supposed to go to the burial place of, it was in a monastery called something, the Trinity, the burial place of children.
I don't know the name of them.
Anyway, it will come to my mind. It is going to be buried there. Unfortunately, there is road inaccessibility to that. So after the rainy season, which is now 3 months, it will be ceremoniously going there and reburied. What's the word? Reinterred?
Yeah. Interred. It was never interred in the first place. Yeah.
taken by mule and so on.
Who will take on that?
The government, the Amhara regional government.
Right.
Yeah.
Not the Katiba.
No, it's outside the limits of the Kantiba.
Wow, this is good. This is all new. This is a scoop. Yeah, I haven't heard any of this before. What I'm hoping, so thanks for buying the hardback today, because I need to sell enough of those so I can then do a paperback and double it in size. So this will all be in there. So thanks very much for the update. That's really good. So, are you ready for object number 2? Okay. I get, for me, the dilemma of how to write about a boy who didn't write his own life story. I found that the most important thing was to confess in my book about the things I didn't know, to be honest about things I didn't know, and then do my best with the bits of his writing and the things that I could find, the sources that I could find, but always try and put them into context. But obviously when you're looking at someone, one great place to start is to start with the parents. And I just, again, but then that sounds like a sensible thing to do. But then you look at someone like Tewodros, such a giant, such a divisive figure at the time, that there's not enough, there's hardly anything written about Alemayehu. There's too much written about Tewodros. You know, the British accounts where he's, initial British accounts where he's basically an African King Arthur. He's like the most glamorous person they'd ever met. You know, Plowden and Bell essentially fell in love with him. There are the British accounts after the big fallout where essentially he is every racist thing you can imagine. You know, he was a monster. He was essentially depicted as a savage who was that Britain needed to put down. You can see that in Punch. Then there are the 3 accounts within Ethiopia. Then I think there was a period where historians and playwrights went through a period of, I think they even call it a new term, heroification, where they, to build up these people. So there's basically all these different accounts of Tewodros, how to get hold of it. There's the image of him in his death. Who wants to be remembered by the image of his death? Richard Whittington Holmes, a British Museum expert, sketched him, giving us our only real account of what his face looked like. But what did Tewodros think of himself? How did he see himself? Remember, he started off as seeing himself as a great Christian ruler and equal to every other Christian power on earth. He had dreams of retaking Jerusalem. He had dreams of taking on the Ottoman Empire. He had dreams of alliances with France, with Britain. He was a Christian superpower. And one way you can hear Tewodros is to read his letters, which are everywhere. And his voice he jumps out of the page. You don't have to be an expert. Listen to his voice. It crackles with energy. My favourite quote from him is, before that, the big letter that everything went wrong, where Britain didn't reply, he sent a letter to Queen Victoria and said, I am a child of Christ. You are a child of Christ. For God's sake, I want friendship. This is not a creature from history. This is a person burning with faith, a person burning with his own status, and a person dreaming big dreams of an alliance with Britain. This is him. This is OR33 in the British Library. One of the hundreds of plundered Meqdela manuscripts that are now in the British Library collection. This is OR733, a selection from the Gospels of Matthew and Mark. And as you know, Ethiopian manuscripts are filled with notes and history and interesting divisions of church property. This one has a breakdown of the book's history. It says this was written for Tewodros, the orders of Tewodros, and includes a portrait of Tewodros. And there's not much point in talking about it, but just look at him. This is Tewodros. This is the amalgamation of sacred and earthly power. What I find particularly interesting, we all know that Tewodros was associated with his artillery and his guns and his military developments. Look at the iconography of this. So, you can see that he has guns on either side of him, as well as the angels and his officials. So I think when I was trying to understand why did Plowden and Bell, Britain's first representatives in Britain, in Ethiopia, 2 guys who I instinctively have fallen in love with myself. I think they were, if only they had stayed on, what a different relationship we would have had. This is the man they fell in love with. This is the British-Ethiopian alliance that could have been before all collapsed. And you can see Tewodros' voice speaks through his letters, how he saw forgetting all the other depictions, shine out of this manuscript, which you can go to the British Library now and see. OR 733, remember that? Just go and ask to see it. That's his. Then Alemayehu himself, what did he leave behind? A handful of letters, handful of signatures, other people's memories. He left a couple of objects. And does this chain look familiar to anyone?
Yes.
Essentially, as I said earlier, Alemayehu was one of the most photographed, engraved figures from that time because he was such an exotic figure in Britain. Everyone wanted his portrait constantly. He developed his own iconography. His dad had the guns and the royal regalia and the sacred regalia. Alemayehu's iconography, where he was essentially presented as an exotic African orphan in Britain, that was his interest. His kind of his appeal to the imagination was, his iconography was this chain. And if you, as I said, just go back and type in Alemayehu with any spelling you want into Google, and his picture comes up again. This is the first portrait of him, as far as I can tell. The British troops had a photographic unit with them, and this is, I see this as essentially a portrait of trauma. This is days, if not hours, after this little boy's world has exploded. You know, he lived all his life in this flat-top mountain in Haileselassie, Ethiopia, with one fixed horizon, where his dad was king, his mum was beautiful queen, he was the prince of all he surveyed. Suddenly he was wrenched out of that. His dad was dead, his mum was soon to die. His horizon shifted. He was put on a steam train, a steamboat. But before that, he was put up in front of a camera and posed. As you can see, he's also been asked to pose. The bigger picture shows there's a big shield here. He's being posed with items of the plunder from the expedition. This is obviously the sword. The shield would have been too big for him. And here we have the first sighting of him with his necklace. I don't think...
Sorry, can I ask, are you sure that that's...
Sorry?
How are you sure that that's him? Because he doesn't look like him. And there are the pictures when he was on the ship.
There are pictures. Well, first of all, the picture is labelled as Prince Alemayehu of Ethiopia in the official records. There's the iconography. There's the chain. Look at the picture I'm about to put up. Look at his hair at the moment. I think it looks like him. Do people think it's a different boy?
Yes.
You think it's the same boy? Yeah. I stand to be corrected because that would be. I've been.
The chain is not individual to him because it's a common thing that Ethiopians wear to
With that particular design.
The one you showed before is a little bit more the one that was on him. That one looks a little bit more than one that was on him when that happened. He was quite little. I think it was less than 6 at the time. So that looks similar.
Yeah.
Because you said there were other children with him.
I mean, I tried to count. These are dark because of the lighting. These are silver. They may have dulled over the years. But I tried to count them with the red beads in the middle. It's described again and again and again that this is the... I'll show you, there are other pictures of him. No, it's good to challenge it because I've been...
Querying what proof you found there. There were lots of pictures of different pictures, so that's all.
But this one in particular was labelled. Basically, the Royal Engineers had an album of photographs of... Sorry?
Was that when he was being taken on the ship from the port?
No, I think this is...
on the mountain.
You can see you can see in another picture of Captain... They took a picture of Captain Speedy soon afterwards, and those are British military tents in the background. So I'm guessing this is made on the plain of Delanta outside, because they didn't get to the top of Meqdela because there were no photographs of Tewodros. So this must have been in the days that followed, just a few days that followed. Well, I mean, I'm most confident this is him because I look at that face and I see a traumatised little boy. You know, he's not there. Whatever's going on is going on deep inside. And I imagine that that's what you look like when your world has exploded and your parents are dead and you're surrounded by these weird aliens, right? With their terrifying machines, the ones they used to massacre all your friends a few days earlier. But here he is again. This is how, on the way back, before his mum died, the soldiers held a sort of what they stage an Ethiopian feast, and they invited him to it. There was a military artist on the expedition who did a sketch of him, which is a beautiful sketch, And from that, the Illustrated London News did an engraving of him, which got back to London before the troops. And this is the front page of the Illustrated London News. So this is the first. This is how British people saw Alemayehu first. Before he'd landed in Britain, this was on the newsstands. So this image of Alemayehu turned into an icon. Again, sort of, it's like Raphael. He's been turned into there's a triangular thing. There's kind of ominous shadows behind him. He's like an icon of sadness, and the Victorian imagination loved to revel in this kind of the little black African orphan. They love that kind of thing. Read any Dickens, they just love it. They love an orphan, and this is a depiction of him there. So that was the, as far as I can tell, the first image of Alemayehu. This is the first image that British people saw.
Sorry, I interrupted. When you finish, shall I ask you?
Yeah, sure.
Do you know what the long-term plan was? Were they hoping to send him back home?
Well, I think it's vague. My general impression. So the question is, did the British have a plan for what to do with Alemayehu? My impression is they had an urgency to get him off the top of Meqdela because they felt that his father's enemies were circling, and that Alemayehu would be killed. I think beyond that, remember you're talking about a massive military force that was not interested in staying in Ethiopia. It was obsessed with getting out of Ethiopia as quickly as it could. There was this huge logistical rush out of the country, turning back to the Red Sea, India, Britain. To be honest, I don't think much thought was put into it. I think he was picked up with the baggage. But you can tell because he was hardly mentioned in the records on the way back, and there were conflicting reports of plans. They would leave him with his mother's people. They would take him to India. The plan solidified as it got down, and I think Captain Speedy, who was an officer with the expedition, was very interested in the boy. I think he saw an opportunity for advancement by becoming the boy's guardian. And my theory, which is contested, is that Captain Speedy essentially made up his mind to take Alemayehu back to Britain. I think the bulk of the British force were barely conscious of him. Just a little 6-year-old, you could easily forget him. And I think then Queen Victoria met him, and his fate became more and more sealed. But I think the tragedy of Alemayehu is that he was not stolen, he was not kidnapped, he was not a prisoner of war at this stage. But he was ignored. There was lots of good intentions, but there was no coherent plan. And I think he was constantly moved from father figure to father figure, to plan to plan. Things were made up as they went along. And in a way, I don't think there was any conspiracy, any plot, any evil intent. I think there was bursts of benign interest which weren't coherent. I think that's my main charge. Yeah.
Shall I make a second point?
Yeah.
Which is, all this came about because of a misunderstanding.
Yeah.
The letter that was written by Emperor Tewodros suggesting to Queen Victoria that they should team up to liberate Jerusalem, she never actually received the letter. It was filed away,
which is lost
in the Foreign Office.
Yeah. That's why I understand it. It wasn't even that. It went to the India office, and it went to the Foreign Office. People thought, well, it was written in Amharic, right? They had an English translation next to it. People would have thought, well, what's this? I've never even recognised this alphabet. Let's just
get lost.
And interested in Ethiopia, we're interested in India. Who's ever heard of Abyssinia? We just don't know what to do with this. So it would have been shoved in a pigeonhole and forgotten. Again, like Alemayehu, it was forgotten in the chaos that must have been the British Empire at the time. So much happening, growing in all directions, so many big initiatives. Easy to lose a letter, easy to lose a little boy. And I think that's what happened.
So do we go are we going to create a session, or just allow people just joining in the conversation?
Well, I'm happy to. How do you all feel like? Is it okay just to have a chat? Or?
Yeah?
Speak
as you are, good.
I mean, yeah. You had a question?
My question was, do you have any idea, first time he was captured, came to this country, how long do you think took him to understand the English, how they understand this, and how he acted to?
Well,
do you have any idea about that?
Well, we know that a year, so that signature was pretty much a year after he landed. So he landed in July 1868. He went to the Isle of Wight, and that was kind of December-ish, November-ish, 1869. So he was practicing his handwriting. You can only presume that he had, at that stage, he had maybe one Ethiopian around him, which was a level of Amharic. But generally, I think the effort was to turn him to teach him English and to, bring him into British society. So all I can say is that he was writing copperplate English within a year. This is an aside, but in my day job I work for Reuters news agency. I'm on the news desk. And Reuters was there in 1868 to get the scoop of him arriving. And Reuters has this quote from Alemayehu as he sights land. And it's a bit like Miranda from The Tempest. It's something along the lines of, "Oh, what a beautiful country. I'm so glad I'm here." I hate to say this about one of my colleagues, but I think we can safely say that quote was manufactured.
That's really interesting. You mentioned a good point. So he came back with the crew, the army, etc.
Yeah.
And he was allowed to stay with the Captain Speedy.
Yeah.
So they came straight via Plymouth to Isle of Wight. Is that right?
Yeah.
And then he was teaching him at home. Is that right? Home teaching? What was that like at the start?
At that stage, it seems to be home teaching. Someone has referred to a school, but I don't think he went to school in the Isle of Wight. I think it was
later. He did, is that right?
He went to school later. Yeah. He went to Cheltenham College and very close and rugby school.
I don't want to interrupt your thing, but But that's quite interesting. Yes, he was.
Yeah, and there's an article later actually. Is that he met a missionary from a Quaker. It's called a Quaker evangelist came along to meet him, and by their testament, they were saying that he had started to forget to read Amharic, and that he was reading well from the English Bible. So his mother's last wish, according to an eyewitness, was that he should keep up his Amharic lessons. That didn't happen. But I'm guessing within a year he was speaking basic English and writing basic English. Yeah.
To read it. Sorry, go on.
Is there a record of his schoolwork at all?
Yes, I'll come to that. Yeah.
In the slides.
What I want to do is to eventually lead on to. Okay, so there are more depictions of Alemayehu. Just tell the story. This is him on the way back. So remember, this is on the. Sorry.
He was going to ask a question, but he'll do it afterwards. Okay, carry on. It's fine.
So remember, spent his whole life with a fixed horizon on the top of Meqdela, picked up, taken down. His mother dies halfway down. Must have imagined this time he first saw the sea. His first vision of the sea. The British had laid a little steam train on the coast of the Red Sea. Imagine that, we're talking space age technology, right? Suddenly he's plumped on a steam train, travelling at scary speeds to the coast. He's then put onto a steamboat up to Suez. His retinue is gradually melting away. Essentially, there's just him and Captain Speedy at this point, plus Captain Speedy's one servant. In those days, this was the year before the Suez Canal, so you couldn't use that. So he got put on a train to Cairo, another scary steam train. From Cairo, another scary steam train to Alexandria. And we're talking, this is days, a mind-bending speed. It must have been in those times. Then in Alexandria, put on another steamboat, which went into the Med and stopped off in Malta, which was then a British possession. And had one photographer, and because everyone wanted a picture of Alemayehu, he stopped off at the photographer in Malta, had his picture taken. The person who lent me the story thinks that Alemayehu looks sad in this picture. I think he looks furious, personally.
Angry.
Yeah, I think he's sitting there thinking, "I'm the prince, right? What the hell are you doing to me?" That's my impression. I don't know. Weirdly, there's another picture where they dressed him up in these clothes. Again, see the chain. There's another picture where they built a little European outfit for him in Suez.
I've seen that one, yes.
And when I look at that picture, I see a shrunken, scared little boy.
Yes.
Here I see a furious prince.
But was that Cameron as well? And as a Cameron,
this is the society photographer in Malta, who's now forgotten.
Right, okay.
So this is on Malta.
Yeah.
So he's on the way to Britain. He lies in Plymouth and see the chain again. This is a miniature that Queen Victoria.
Can you see?
Yeah, seeing the chain again. So Queen Victoria fell in love with him. She was a deeply passionate, sentimental woman. So she had mementos of Alemayehu as well. This is in the Royal Collection. Again, see, he's got his iconography, the chain. He was photographed by Julia Margaret Cameron, the great aunt or something of Virginia Woolf, who, seriously, if you want to have a dip into the bizarre Victorian imagination, look at her other photographs. She's got Captain Speedy poised with a spear over his Ethiopian servant with a spear point at the neck. This kind of weird pornography of violence and sentimentality.
So they're trying to create an image. What was it like at the time?
And here we have Alemayehu again, posed with plunder. The shield in the background, the sword here. Technically, some of the most beautiful photographs from the Victorian era are the photographs of Alemayehu by Julia Margaret Cameron. This is Captain Speedy at last. Again, Victorian and British people like hair. They also love dressing up, even to this day. So Captain Speedy loved dressing up in what he saw as authentic Abyssinian warrior outfits. So he was only like 6'7", and he'd be walking around Victorian Britain dressed like this. I don't know what you. Yeah.
But just to add on that one, I think he was seen red beard, red hair.
Yeah. So a 6'2", 6'7" guy with bright red hair.
Not someone you would see as a British fellow. No, someone.
And this is Queen Victoria's first vision of Alemayehu, is Captain Speedy walking hand in hand up the beach in Isle of Wight. So you talk about this giant, fancy dress obsessive, holding hands with a little, in her eyes, poor little African orphan. She fell in love with this image. This kind of plays into every Victorian imagination you can think of. And it was Queen Victoria that fixed Alemayehu's fate. She said, Captain Speedy, you are his guardian. British government, you will give him this money every year to look after Alemayehu. The same amount of money that they had every year through his life until he turned 18. That amount of money has just gone out of my head. And it's in the book.
And Speedy is not related to any royal bloodline, anything at all.
No. If he was looking for advancement, this worked. Yeah. He had basically latched it onto Alemayehu, and within days he's got a personal audience with Queen Victoria. So
anyway, okay.
I'm sorry, can I just get something clear, very clear?
Yeah.
In as far as Ethiopians are concerned, Prince Alemayehu is none other than a prisoner of war.
Right.
All right? But through your description, there's nothing to suggest that.
Because I don't see it as clearly as that.
I can agree that.
Yeah.
But why would an expeditionary force go and grab a 6-year-old and bring him to England without the consent and knowledge of the British government?
Because I think there's this motto that we have as journalism that always look first for cock-ups rather than conspiracies, right? And I don't see what Britain had to gain from having a little boy. I don't see, if there was a plot to kidnap a prisoner of war, there must be some significant reason why the British government wanted to plot that. And at this stage, from reading the government, Britain had had enough of Ethiopia. Basically, they'd had these two dreamers, Walter and Plowden, who described this wonderful relationship that Ethiopia would be a land of milk and honey and gold and diamonds and blah-de-blah-de-blah-de-blah. And all they got out of it was an expensive and embarrassing war. And there's actually there's a memo from the Foreign Secretary that said, Abyssinia policy from this day on is to have no Abyssinia policy, as in good riddance. They've embarrassed us, they've cost us dear. So I can't see anything that Britain had to gain from kidnapping a little boy. What I think is much more likely, because you see, things just go wrong, right? And big plans collapse and things happen by accident, is that this little boy was picked up and there was an initial plan to get him away from his father's enemies, which is agreed by everyone. But after that, there was the momentum of the British rush out, the ambition of Captain Speedy, and he ended up here. And then what do you do with him? You can't send him back again because we don't want anything more to do with him. We haven't got any representatives in Abyssinia, so we're stuck with this little boy. Okay, this Captain Speedy guy has a plan. Let's just roll with that, and we'll turn him into a British gentleman, and he can do something in India or something. I really think, I mean, that's my gut feeling, that it was no big plan because we had no motive. There was just chaos because British Empire grew through succession of chaotic jumps, and and this little boy, as children do, get caught up in the machinery. And in a way, he was stolen because his future was stolen. You know, he should have been like that Queen Victoria. He should have shaken the hands of the baby King Charles. You know, he should have still been with us. But through a series of events, it's a sad story. But I couldn't find any evidence of a conspiracy or a plot.
And with respect,
Yeah.
we see it differently.
Yeah.
It was a punitive action taken by the United Kingdom against Ethiopia.
Yeah.
Tit for tat. You took our...
I didn't.
No. Tewodros had the audacity to take British hostages, so we will show him.
I don't know how far you've gone in your slides, but I think that's,
Yeah, but only...
This is what Ethiopians think.
Okay, I just haven't found... if that was true, I would expect to find someone saying that, and I could...
Okay, then what... I can't see the link between people... what's his name? Speedy taking Alemayehu.
Yeah.
If that is a case of a British gentleman loving to take him and...
Protect him.
Protect him, being his guardian, that's fostering.
Yeah.
Okay, so that I can accept. Then you have a... You can't British monarchy entered into this.
Well, should
be interesting.
No, should we have this out? This is good. I find this interesting.
The other thing I would like to add to that is, it's not just, let's go and get him, how dare he. The number of British museums sent somebody, there was a British museum contingency to go and get all
treasures.
Both the treasures, the book, the library there. Tewodros is a warrior, he's everything, he's not a bookkeeper, he was advised to build all this, a big library, he got all the books from all over the country.
Yeah.
Who was the advising people were those people who were the British, the
missionaries.
The missionaries.
Yeah.
They were the ones advising him to build this library. All of these happened, and then the expedition, the number of people, the number of animals to rescue this. A few, I don't know how many people. Not even 100, 30, how many?
Yeah, 30, 40.
Yeah. To rescue, have you seen? Have you got the number of animals from...
Yeah, the elephants, the
mules, elephants.
Yeah. So why are they...
Why was the expedition so big?
All that big expedition is to get the British, everybody, every Western country up to even now, the main thing they want to get from Ethiopia is the books, the manuscripts, the information from the first queen, the other queen, the queen...
Queen of Sheba.
No. I mean, the British queen,
Victoria.
Elizabeth, the first
Elizabeth, yeah.
From her, she sent somebody to get everybody up to now. In the last 50 years, there are more than 1 million manuscripts have been taken out of Ethiopia.
Right.
Sold and sold. Even now, all this war, everything is going around.
I'm just trying to bring you back to the actual point.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's fine.
Information they want. There are all the old books, all the information, all the medicine, all...
There was a definite plan, but the British Museum thought, excellent, the soldiers going in, we want to get our hands on everything, and they sent an expert whose job was to hang on the battlefield and pick up loot, and they gave him oodles of money to do it. So yeah, that was a big plot by the British Museum to get loot. The British government...
British Museum, not British government is not involved in that. Of course the British government did.
The British government, I think their main aim was to save face. They were desperate. They just had the Indian Mutiny a few years earlier.
We always get confused.
So we were just talking, currently we're talking about the plunder, maybe you'll say something later on. A few things. But we're talking about just the first initial part of the trial.
This is really just to show that he's changed in lots of pictures.
Can I ask that question?
Yeah?
Where was he? In Isle of Wight or in London?
Which one?
The prince.
So at this stage,
I know he was.
this one, and this one, he was in the Isle of Wight.
Most of the time.
Yeah, he spent his first year in the Isle of Wight. And he had visits to London and around the place, but he spent most of his time in the Isle of Wight.
And where did he die?
Where did he stay?
He died.
He died in Headingley, outside Leeds.
Okay.
Leeds.
Yeah. One Holland Lane, Headingley.
Yes. Initially he was.
That's a spoiler. Did anyone know he died? Is that all right?
No, that's not a thing.
Sorry.
So yes, the initial part was in Isle of Wight, visiting Windsorcastle, London, wherever.
Yeah, Isle of Wight.
And then schooling after that. India. And then he comes back, some years back.
And then London, Cheltenham, Rugby.
And then Leeds.
Sandhurst College.
Sandhurst as well.
Boo, and then Leeds.
After, let's go. Yeah, let's.
Okay. So this is just to show his iconography has changed. And again, this was. Who's seen that Peter Jackson film of the First World War? Essentially, he does this magic thing where he takes this black and white footage of the First World War, and then suddenly he floods it with colour. And suddenly you realise you're not looking at historical footage anymore. You're looking at my granddad. You're looking at. When I first saw the picture of that chain, there he is again. I thought, my gosh, he's not a creature of history. This boy existed, and that's not as is so much of the Meqdela plunder. It's not on display. It's in a box in the British Museum. Captain Speedy kept this after Alemayehu died. Captain Speedy's widow gave it to the British Museum.
Oh, later returned.
Yeah. Just very briefly.
That's the dress of the queen, isn't it?
Exactly. So I want to talk about the power of objects. I'm going to speed up now, but
yeah.
I think when I lost both my parents over the last few years, and I'm sure a lot of you have done the same, but there's this moment when you go back after the funeral, you go to their house, and you go through the cupboards and drawers, and you pick out their broken costume jewellery and their shirts and their jackets. And this is the proper treasure, right? This is how you relate to your parents. You know, I have my father's jacket, my sisters have my mother's dresses and their jewellery. There's evidence from the letters that Alemayehu, remember a traumatised little boy whose parents had just died, forgetting all the other stories, we all know that has an inevitable thing. There are references in the correspondence that he wanted mementos of Ethiopia. He had very few. He had his chain, he had his mother's book of Psalms, which I'll whip through later. But as far as I can tell, he never got a chance to do what I did, which is to go through his mother's cupboards and pick up her jewellery, pick up her dresses. The reason that's so tragic is because all his mother's dresses and jewellery and possessions, something like, were wrapped up, sent to sent to Aden for some reason, and then sent to London, and they were put in the collection of what was then the South Kensington Museum, is now the V&A. And I had the privilege of going backstage in the V&A and looking at this dress. And I don't know, do you know about Alemayehu's mum?
Yes.
Very little is known about her, I think. You know, she's more a symbol. You know, her name, Tewodros II, beautiful goals, beautiful things. And there were sort of these totemic saint-like stories told about her. Sometimes they put this dress on a dressmaker's dummy, and suddenly she's there. The woman is there. And the thing that struck me, this is the thing about objects, to try and get close to the story when words can't. I couldn't believe these sleeves. They're so little. They're so tiny. She was, I think she was married very young. I insulted my daughter in the initial draft of my book by saying even my daughter couldn't have got her into this dress. She made me take that passage out. But these sleeves are really skinny. And then see how the dress has been altered. You know, there have been panels put at the top. She was married to Tewodros as a young girl. Some people say 12, 13, 14. She would have grown into her role, and as she physically grew into her role, her dress grew with her by these panels. And then look at the hem. It's it's ragged, and you can see discoloration of dust. You know, she was both a symbol of purity, beauty, gold. She was the queen, but she was very much a queen who walked on the ground. You can see Meqdela in this dress, and imagine if Alemayehu had a chance to do what I did, to go through his mother's possessions. But it's go through the V&A website, look for her names, and it's bizarre. You know, just necklaces, rings, jewelry. It's such an intimate experience to see her things. And this is something that was denied Alemayehu. So that's object number 4. Oh, and I love this, that there's this big campaign to free the Meqdela loot and get it returned to Ethiopia. This dress has already escaped because it's been picked up by modern dressmakers, and you can buy this dress today on the internet. I just love the fact that the V&A can keep hold of it as long as it wants. It's too late. The dress has scarpered. It's out there in the wild. No. This is a reference to his prayer book and the visit by the Quaker. But I think we're running short of time. But her prayer book is also in the British Museum in a box. It's not. There's no image of it. I've asked to have a look at it. I haven't managed to do it yet. But again, it's just interesting that Alemayehu kept hold of these things. He had his chain. He had his mum's psalter, Book of Psalms, obviously a key thing for any Ethiopian Christian. And this describes how they were his prized possessions, and that when the missionary came to see him, he took out his psalter and showed it to him like a treasure, And we have them both in the British Museum. The story is often told of Alemayehu leaving Ethiopia behind him and starting a new life in Britain. Obviously, as we have today, we know he left a family behind him, and I'm really honoured that some of them are here today. But his grandma, again, this brings the story away from abstract kings and queens and figures of history. His grandmother was, I think, in the Simien Mountains at this stage, and she wrote a couple of letters, one to Queen Victoria and one to Alemayehu.
Yeah.
As far as I know, he didn't get them. But these are not
the abstract letters of figures from history. I'm sure you can also read that as a beginner.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
On that point, I read a book ages ago, I don't remember the author, it's an Ethiopian gentleman. And it was a little book, so I just would say for my Ethiopian present families here. To look for it was a little book written by some, I don't remember who it was, but he did a lot of research on this and wrote about Alemayehu. And one of the things he said was, he did receive the letters.
He's what?
He did receive letters.
Oh, really?
There was contact made. Yeah.
So which book? I haven't come across this book.
I've tried to find it, I lost it. It's a small book, it's been printed here during
Okay.
from former kings.
Well, it'd be wonderful if you do get them.
I mean, other Ethiopian, fellows could look for it in the future. I don't know. I've tried very hard.
So he has.
So in there he said there were some letters that he received, and then he started to, really question a little bit more about his, background, and that there was a bit of hope there because he was cut off from everything.
That makes sense.
And that makes sense because Ethiopia was all over the place during Asian times, and that was a big surprise. It was quite a surprise for me that they managed to get a letter to or contact him in some way, whether it's a letter or something.
Can I just read a short passage from the translation? You can tell me whether this translation is any good. But all I want to communicate the fact that this is not a queen or queen mother writing to another queen. This is a grandma writing to her grandson, and this always gets me every time.
My dear child, my dear, how are you? Ever since we parted until today, why did you not send me a letter? The amount of times my grandma would send me a letter saying, you never write.
Yes.
Whilst I die in grief and in mourning, I have no other son, no other hope but you. Now quickly send me a letter, providing your likeness and a picture, so that I may see it. May Christ enable us to meet. Amen. Be friendly towards the British Queen, the Russian King, the French King, towards all kings. Send letters. All the people of Abyssinia are waiting for you, are desirous of you. Be wise. Open the eyes of the people of Abyssinia, for they have become blind. Open up science for them. Let them not remain thus, blind as they are. Signed with her name. But I think that's just beautiful. That she's saying, write me a letter. Why do you never write? Write me a letter. And if you see the Queen, you be polite. Be nice to him. Be nice to them. If you're going to go to school, work hard. Come back again. Teach us some stuff. But essentially, this is not, again, I say it again and again, this is not, it is possible to see through the fragments of history and to see real people, a real grandma writing to her real grandson. And I really hope he got it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd love. I didn't even notice that.
And he did try to come back in the end, I guess, but and he didn't quite make.
Yeah.
but something maybe you could say later on.
But I'm just going to whiz through these.
Yeah.
One of my ambitions is to have a Alemayehu trail around Britain, because I think there are places where it's possible to trace his journey around Britain and to have connections between Alemayehu and Britain, and to just remember who he went. And so, just to briefly say, he went to Isle of Wight. Captain Speedy was ambitious. He was always connected with ambitious father figures. Captain Speedy got bored of the Isle of Wight. It's lovely, but I can imagine, you know, a thrusting young officer. He got a job as a police official in India. So again, Alemayehu was on the move. Mediterranean, Red Sea, Abyssinia on his right-hand side this time. India, in Oud, which is on the northern India. Speedy got bored again, moved on to the Straits colonies, so Malaysia, Singapore. The British government, through the Chancellor, suddenly woke up that they were basically paying a lot of money every year to fund this officer's dash around from job to job to job. So they suddenly stepped in and said, this is not good enough. This boy is running wild, can barely read, is not very good at school. We need to take more responsibility for him. We're going to step in now and take him away from your custody, Captain Speedy, and place him in the guardianship of an English teacher. Poor boy, we're going to put him through the English boarding school system. And imagine, so the trauma, he's lost his mum and dad, he's got some form of family with Captain Speedy who marries, he's got a guardian who at least is
exciting and glamorous, drags him around the world, and suddenly the British government said, no, that relationship ends. And there's a very painful soap opera moment where he's dragged back to Britain.
And basically almost forcibly handed over to Jex Blake, who's the headmaster of Cheltenham College. This is Cheltenham College here, and you can go there, look through the archives, and this is his signing in book. And if you want to, you can follow his progress through his lessons, which class he did. He's listed in which class he was in, what books he read, what books he took home. Turns out he wasn't particularly booky. He loved sports. He tried hard at running and all that kind of thing. So he was going more towards the schooling that would send him to the British Army. His new headmaster, surprise, surprise, was an ambitious, thrusting Victorian gentleman who got bored of being in Cheltenham and got a new job as the headmaster of rugby.
Who's this, Jex Blake?
Jex Blake.
Right.
An amazing figure. Queen Victoria was mortified that he was growing up because Jex Blake had 8 or 9 daughters and thought that they would force Alemayehu to play with dolls.
9 daughters, Alemayehu moves in.
Yeah. It turns out that the Jex Blake daughters were some of the hardest, coolest women in Victorian Britain. They were proto-suffragettes. They were suffragettes before the Pankhursts. They went on to lead universities, become some of the first female doctors. Anyway, Cheltenham, he was dragged from Cheltenham, dragged across the country with the Jex Blakes.
So Jex Blake's found another job.
He had another job, dragged into rugby.
And he takes him with him.
Here he is here. Okay. So, remember, I'm grasping at straws. I'm trying to follow the story through. Who here would like to be judged by their school photograph? Who would like to have a historian poring over and writing 2 chapters based on what they're guessing from one school photograph? First of all, can you see can anyone see Alemayehu?
That's not easy to find him. I tried. It's not easy, but it took me a while to find him.
Okay.
But come on, I'll give Kashka Flay.
No.
Go.
Okay,
where is he going?
Okay, even in the close-up.
Yeah.
Here's the close-up.
Yeah.
Can you see it right there?
He was hiding.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you see it? Okay, first of all, can you all wonder what it must have been like to go to school with this guy? What is good? Yes. You know the Addams Family in Lurch? He's kind of, that's like a young man.
And I love it. I mean, look at this guy. I don't know. I just love these faces.
They're all very.
It's really unfair, but I'm trying to get information from a school photograph. I think he's out of his depth here. I think he's
hiding. I think he's subdued. I mean, to be the only black kid in the class and not to be able to spot him in the class photograph, he's hiding, right? Again, I don't want to read too much into it, but I have to.
And that's rugby.
That's 1876 in rugby. Yeah, as we know, one of England's top schools. This is the next year. Can you see?
Yes.
Look at that. Okay. Here I cling on to hope because I think he's cheered up a bit.
Different now.
Yeah. To me, he looks like. Look how everyone's neat collars and ties. His collars all over the place.
So is that Jake Blake?
No, that's his housemaster, whose name I've forgotten. But in rugby, you live with. There's a housemaster who actually has his own big house, and you live with. And that's like your school house, and so you live in that little family in the school, and that's his houseboat.
Okay.
To me, he's found a way of surviving in this school, maybe to be the class clown or something, or maybe some bully has just grabbed over and grabbed his tie. I don't know. Whatever it is, I hold on to the hope that he's found some friends a year later.
Do we have any evidence about, or do we know anything about his experience in England, especially at school?
Well, his classmates, lots of them have mentioned him in his autobiography, in their biographies and memoirs. My overall impression, and take it to the fact that I have fallen for Alemayehu, so I'm on his side. My overall impression is that he came out of trauma and incredible challenges, but there was something at this stage of his life that was irrepressible, that he was always throwing himself at things. He was, you read the school reports, it said he was bowled out for 12 in cricket, but he tried the hardest, or he came fourth in the steeplechase, or he wasn't very, it was constantly saying he's useless at books, he's useless at reading, he's not that kind of student, but he loves riding, he loves football, he loves rugby. If you go to rugby school, they've got a watercolour showing a scrum, and there's one lone black schoolboy at the back, and that's Alemayehu playing rugby at rugby. It's amazing. That should have been one of my objects, because it's an amazing painting to see. And tragically, I think at one point in his life, which is unfortunately soon to come, he met obstacles that he couldn't surmount. But I say to his credit, well, we'll see, it's coming. I think such as the reality of the British Empire, such as the reality of racism, the reality of what it means to join the British Army, the reality of being out of your country without a father, without a family, without any coherent plan for what to do with your future. I think, he was a child in foster care, and I think he wasn't given proper, and he didn't have an exit strategy out of it, and I think that's what. And finally, obviously, he hit the barrier of ill health and a tragic event. But at this stage, I take heart from this photograph, and I take heart from the accounts of his schoolfellows that basically describe the perfect English schoolboy who was into his sports. There was one account of some bully picked a fight with him. He said, "Okay, I'll fight you." They had a fight, but then the school bell rang for dinner. They went for dinner, and then they came back and they finished their fight. And in the life of Billy Bunter, Victorian boyhood, that makes him a hero. No. I like him, and
that's great. Yes, wonderful. Yes. Oh wow.
He left school. What to do with a boy who wasn't very booky, who wasn't going to become a civil servant, who, because he's black, you have various assumptions about what he can't do. There's no way a black person can manage a white office, or a black officer could be an officer over white troops. What do you do with him? One idea was maybe to send him out to the empire where there are other non-white people, and send them out as an army is a good thing for a good active boy to do. So as he's a prince, he's an officer, right? So
the assumption was school is not for him. He's not doing.
Well, he's passed out of school. He's now 18.
So
he's 17, 18.
He's good at sport, physical thing. Let's turn
him into an officer, and maybe send him to one of the farthest reaches of the empire where there are people of colour.
Right. Did he graduate from Sandhurst? Sorry for interjecting.
So
did he graduate from Sandhurst?
This is exactly what I'm going to show. So he arrives in Sandhurst a year younger than pretty much everyone else. The only black boy in Sandhurst. We've got his height. We've got all the matches heights. Pretty much the shortest boy in Sandhurst. This means, I can remember, this means a lot when you're 16, right, 17. Sandhurst is still to this day notorious for bullying, but particularly in those days. People almost take a pride in it, sort of like, I survived Sandhurst. therefore there's a kind of English public school system that I got bullied, therefore I bully. You know, it kind of goes down the chain. What I think is notable is that while there's lots of school fellows who wrote their memoirs about his time at school, none of these boys wrote about their memories of Alemayehu at Sandhurst. There are a few letters. There's a letter from one of the Jex Blake girls who jumped to his defence when someone wrote something nasty about him in the newspaper. She wrote a letter saying he was a lovely boy, he was a gentleman, he was badly bullied at Sandhurst. And I think, and I'm biased because I went to boarding school and I hated it, I think something horrible happened this year, 1877-8. So these are the marks. I wish it was clearer, but these are the subject matters. So this is the son of Emperor Tewodros, the great tactician, the great warrior. If you look at his marks, this is Alemayehu here. Can you see his name?
It's second from the bottom.
Second from bottom. You can see the close-up later. There's his height, his age when we're entering. See that? See that 0?
Yeah.
A number with a line through it means a fail, right? I should say as a caveat, it's impossible to fail Sandhurst, right? So the British Empire is expanding. It's desperate to send officers to the front line all over the place. It just wants a constant supply of officers, so it's almost impossible to fail Sandhurst because they just want a process of people out. And Alemayehu crashed out. They got down to a year. They have their first round of exams, crashes out, fail, one little pass, but not good enough. It says failed at something like that. Then you get a chance to resit if you fail, which I think there were 5 boys in his year failed. They get to resit. They passed, or there are other ways of doing it. You kind of sign on as a soldier, then you get promoted. But as I said, it's impossible to fail. And look at this. This is his time moving through Sandhurst, signing on first exams, second exams, where they ended up. So appointed second lieutenant. Second lieutenant is what you enter on as a sort of junior officer. That's the basic bog standard officer. Appointed, withdrawn. And written and last one appointed. So something horrible happened here. You know, he wasn't bookish, but this isn't all about bookish. This is about riding and tactics and playing soldiers and that kind of thing.
So he shouldn't fail really, but
he shouldn't have failed. But somehow, I see evidence of a breakdown here, a nervous breakdown, a collapse, a crashing out of school. You know, and it says withdrawn. So imagine the situation where he's in a foreign country without a plan. The one big plan, because he's not into books, is to make him a soldier. He's failed at that. What does he do? The government's at a loss, you know. There are letters between him and his guardian, and the guardian, the phrase is, he has a strange hankering to go home, which we say is out of the question, because there was a new emperor in charge of, Emperor Johannes at this stage. And remember, Britain wanted nothing more to do with troubles in Ethiopia. They weren't going to send it back. Out of the question. Okay. So finally they said, so what do you want to do otherwise? He remembered that he had one tutor crammed to get into military college, Cyril Ransom. And if that name rings a bell, he later went on to have a son called Arthur. Yeah. So this is the father of Arthur Ransom, the writer of the Swallows and Amazon books. Alemayehu remembered liking him and said, can I go and do some cramming with Cyril Ransom, who had moved on from Rugby and had a house outside Headingley in Leeds. And the government said, okay, we've run out of ideas.
Let's try this.
Let's try this. Let's maybe, get the basics, get English. Maybe we fail all exams, go and try again, resit. Yeah. Let's try. So he moved into, well, in my imagination, I thought, he moved into an old, dark Victorian house in Headingley, forgetting that this was the Victorian era, therefore it would be a brand new house. But he moved into a house in Headingley, and I think you all know what happened, right? He fell ill. There was one night on a Victorian winter, this is when he went out to go to the loo, loos are outside in those days. Something happened there, maybe he fell asleep on the loo, something like that. He caught a chill, which turned into a chest infection. he came back, took to his bed, and as far as I can tell, do you know the phrase "turning your face to the wall"? Don't know. You know, some people when they reach this, they decide to die, right? Yeah. And one can decide to die. As far as I can tell, he turned his face to the wall, and in November 1879, he died in a bed in Headingley. And Queen Victoria, then all the big Victorian emotions come in, all the former father figures come together, and lots of telegram zooming and letter zooming and great expressions of grief. Too late. You know, he's dead, hadn't even got to 19. And I went to, this is one of the, there are some times when you're researching, it's a glorious, you go to an archive and you can ask for anything. They bring you boxes of manuscripts. It's like Christmas. Every time they just bring you a box and it's got magic things in it. I went to the archive in Leeds University where there was a Sir Ransom archive, and they've got an Alemayehu box. And they brought me the Alemayehu box. And I thought I'd seen every picture of Alemayehu that there was through Google. And then I opened an envelope and this fell out. Which,
this is soon after he passed away.
Hours after, yeah. So again, it's this Victorian obsession with death and the beauty of death and the romance of death. Queen Victoria wrote, and guess what she wanted? She wanted a lock of his hair. She wanted mementos. There was discussion of what to do with his very different books and possessions, which were split among the nursing staff. They took a death mask of him so they could get they wanted to have a bust, a sculpture of him, and they brought in the best photographer from Leeds. Remember, this boy's been photographed every minute of his life, up to the hours after his life. There's another one, but what can you say? What a beautiful boy. That's all you can say. So this is the bed in Headingley where he died. He was put on a train to Windsor. And there are lots of quite beautiful descriptions of the funeral service, and you know what music was played. Bizarrely, it was the same. It was a death march of Saul, which was the same music that the military band played to parade his mother to her grave.
When they left her.
When they left her behind. And dragged him on. You know,
yes.
And he lies, as we were saying earlier, in a tomb outside the gates of St George's Chapel, Windsor Castle.
That was later on. He was first buried inside St George's Chapel.
Right.
And years later taken out. There's a plaque where he was first buried.
Okay.
It's read, "I was a stranger."
And you took
they
me.
welcomed me in.
Yeah.
That still exists.
It's still there.
But then it was taken out about 2 or 3 meters outside.
Yeah. There's a kind of a mausoleum where he's a catacomb.
It's written there near the.
It's inside the.
No, also in the garden of.
Oh really? Okay.
Yeah, where
Okay.
he was formerly buried.
Yeah.
I was going to add one more. I don't know if you've got more things to say, but interesting. I mean, it could be a link to this house too. So this is much later. Later on, when Emperor Haileselassie came to visit in his regent when he was Teferimokon. Emperor Haileselassie, when he came when he was regent. As a regent, he went to visit. Of course, he's Ethiopian. He knows this history, and goes to visit Windsor. Yeah. And he recognized the way it's been written.
I think it was Alemayehu Simeon.
It was not quite.
So he
asked us, it should be written again properly.
As Alemayehu Tewodros.
Yeah. And then that's now, is it badged or something?
There's a oblong of metal which they've bolted on top of it. So
I thought that's quite fascinating story.
Yeah.
Thank you, we didn't know that.
Yeah, it was written with Simeon first. Alemayehu Simeon.
Shall I ask one question?
You go more. Sorry, go on.
So, Madam.
He was quite a young man at 18. Do we know that he had any romantic inclination?
Well, he must have done, right?
Any kid running around from him now?
I'm not a musician, but I would imagine that the racism of the time would have made relationships impossible. I mean, and there's a few articles in the press, but they're jokes. They're saying, let's match him up with Princess Blah, and it's kind of, who would think of marrying an African prince with her? But it's suggested as a joke. Well, I agree with you, but at the time it was, as far as I can tell, he didn't.
Even today.
Yeah.
let alone in those days.
Yeah. So there is evidence that he had. So you got male friends that he wrote letters to.
Do we go to Queen or should we
Can I just have
an ending? Queen Essential, but quickly.
How long he was ill? Do you have any idea how long?
A matter of months. Just a few months.
Yeah.
Can I? So for me, this is tragic non-description. So I want to end on a happy ending.
Yeah.
To be honest, the whole reason why I called the book The Prince and the Plunder, I put the plunder at the end because I didn't want to end on his death. I wanted to have some feeling of life continuing, of future direction. And I went to One Holland Lane, and it was a 1960s bungalow. And I thought, disaster. After all this time, what a waste. And I went away again, actually. And then I think Lem Sisse said, no, I've seen the house where he died. And I went back again, and I went back to the 60s bungalow. I knocked on the door and said, did this used to be a Victorian house? And they said, no, as far as I know, that this was just fields beforehand.
Yeah.
I thought, okay, I'm going to cut my losses. I'm going to knock on the door of number 2 Holland Lane, so I can at least get. So basically, it's a road with a line of Victorian terraces, really posh Victorian terraces, ones that you would die for in London. And then it's on a hill, and then it goes down a bit, and then there are the 60s bungalows down here. And so I went up to number 2 Holland Lane, which was outside the road, and I knocked on the door. And a lady opened the door, and I looked over her shoulder, and I saw a portrait of Alemayehu on the wall just behind her. And I found it very moving that. So essentially, what all that had happened is that when they built up the other side of the road, they changed the road numbers. So one Holland became 2 Holland Lane, and this was the house.
And it's still there.
And through all those years, because this woman was an academic and had taken an interest in local history, and she had an Alemayehu folder in her living room, she'd taken an interest in the history of her road. She had built there's a memorial to Alemayehu in St George's Chapel, Windsorcastle. There's a memorial to Alemayehu in the hall of 2 Holland Lane, Headingley. And I find that much more moving because it's there through love,
Yeah.
And I'm going to kick myself because I thought I'll take a picture. I took it from the wrong end of the hall. But this should give you an idea that he did not die in a miserable, damp, horrible Victorian squalor. He died in a very posh new build. And this house, if you go into it now, it's drenched in light. Big windows. The bedroom he was in had big windows looking over the garden. I take some comfort from that. I take a whole lot of comfort that there's a family in Headingley that remembers him. And after one visit, I think, I could really do with a pint. So I walked up the road, and there's this huge Wetherspoons pub. You know Wetherspoons, right? Yeah. Just a pub. I went in for a drink and lunch, and then I went to the was waiting for my food, and I saw where the waiters were going, and this is the serving hatch in the Golden Beam, Headingley. So there's a massive portrait. Prince Alemayehu, spelt my way. Yes. So he lives on in Windsorcastle, in Headingley, and Wetherspoons. Who knew that Wetherspoons would emerge as the heroes of this story?
I think it's incredible, really.
Has he ever kept a diary? Because diaries are very often. Have you managed to find a diary?
If I find one, I'm going to be furious because I've written a book.
I'm sure you have one because it's a good thing to do, isn't it?
There's some letters, and I know a proper I'm a journalist.
Yeah.
I know there's a proper historian out there who's writing another biography of Alemayehu. No doubt he will come out with a diary of Alemayehu, but I didn't find one.
Who is he?
Ian Campbell?
Is Ian Campbell writing them?
Oh, that's probably secret.
He's coming here in 2 months' time. We can ask him.
Okay, block that out of the thing.
Can I ask one question about the burial?
Yeah.
Who arranged the burial? The government?
Well, it would have been the royal family. So it was discussed by the. There would have been St George's Chapel is a royal peculiar, which means a church not run by the Church of England, but a church run by the royal family. And so if you go to the archives of St George's Chapel, there are minutes of all the top deacons and that lot.
We know who attended from the royal family?
Yeah, there's a full guest list. Queen Victoria didn't make it, but she was represented by her son. And it's interesting, it's a cast list of all his failed father figures. Captain Speedy was there, Cyril Ransom was there, Jex Blakes were there, family friends in Isle of Wight were there. And I think one of his boyhood friends who he wrote to was also in the congregation. Yeah,
that's great. So William's got a question.
So one thing that really struck me about your book is this whole thing was a misunderstanding, and there wasn't any plan really, and yet 50,000 people, and a railway, and steam engines, and artillery, and 44 elephants were transported 10,000 miles away. There were a lot of people obeying a lot of orders.
Yeah.
So there's a huge logistical thing. Did you see anything about the role of the Navy in all of this?
Yeah.
How did this sort of thing that?
Well, that has been written about extensively, the military campaign, so I purposely didn't get into that.
Right.
But I think the cock-up was Alemayehu. The invasion was not a cock-up, that was a plan.
Right.
And the motivation for that was basically, so Britain was an up-and-coming imperial power. Remember, the British Empire isn't there yet. The scramble for Africa hasn't happened yet. Britain is insecure and is trying to prove itself and against all the other. Remember, it's essentially a European competition, the empire. And it's recently had the huge humiliation of the, what it called the Indian Mutiny, which Indians call the First War of Independence, which was a huge embarrassment. So basically this great imperial power was brought to the edge of defeat by its own troops, and this lifted the lid on the great confidence trick at the heart of the British Empire. The confidence trick is that we dominated India with a few thousand people. So we dominated India, millions and millions of people. We managed to dominate it with thousands and thousands of people. That essentially is a confidence trick, right? Because by sheer weight of numbers, we could have got pushed off easily.
And that's true throughout the whole British Empire, that we didn't dominate in terms of numbers, we dominated in terms of our reputation and our technology. So basically, Indian Mutiny, we got away with it, just.
And if you look at the House of Commons debate on the thing, there's people are saying, they call him a dusky monarch. This dusky monarch has humiliated us by imprisoning our consul and these missionaries. They didn't really care about the missionaries. Missionaries were really annoying. They were always getting into scrapes. But the calculation was, we have no choice. We have to rescue these people or our reputation's done. So they did that like in Iraq. What was the phrase in Iraq? Overwhelming force. It wasn't overwhelming force.
Shock and awe. Could I make a follow-up observation?
Yeah.
This is quite a difficult thing to say. I've been looking into my ancestry because I'm going to Jamaica with Pauline in January.
Yeah.
So researching as one does. And there's a certain Admiral Sir Leopold Heath who commanded the East Africa Squadron, which played a good role in finishing the slave trade off the coast of East Africa. But I was a little shocked to discover last week that he was in charge of all the ships that supported the Abyssinia expedition.
Oh, really?
Oh, no.
So all the materials and men who came to Ethiopia would have come on ships under his command, and all the plunder, and indeed the prince, would have been taken away on ships commanded by my great-great-grandfather.
Right.
So I'm just processing that.
I can give you the ships.
Would you like to apologise?
I think suffice it to say, if I needed a justification for all the effort and work that I put into looking after this legacy, perhaps I just found it.
I can put another positive spin on that. Tewodros' whole vision was to have an alliance with Britain and to share its military technology. And the great tragedy is that when Britain finally got round to bringing in all its technology, it was against him. And there were reports of him just being really interested. The sheer technology, what he wanted was for Britain to arrive en masse with all this stuff. it's such a tragedy that what took it to arrive with that stuff was this disaster.
Would you put, I mean, the Walter, I mean, Ethiopian, we should all, this man was, the Walter scenario, John Bell.
Walter Plowden, yeah.
Walter Plowden, I beg your pardon. Walter Plowden and John Bell, that relationship was incredible.
Yeah.
Many things supposed to be beautiful, great connection, Britain and Ethiopia.
Yeah, yeah. And that's a bromance.
That's a story.
A bromance, yeah.
And that's just collapse, of course.
Can I speak to that?
Yeah.
I've prepared a short something today. It's probably a controversial opinion.
Come to the front. Come here.
So just to say, I'm representing my own views here, not necessarily into the House's views. I'd like to begin by saying that the Meqdela treasures should be returned immediately, in the same haste that the British Museum returned the Kebra Nagast to Emperor Johannes when they were told of its importance to him. Especially quickly should be returned the dozens of holy tabots and other sacred items to the church. The premeditated thievery at Meqdela is a long-standing stain on Britain's relationship with Ethiopia. And this stealing attitude continued up to 1943, when Ethiopia was stripped by its liberator of crucial material resources for development after the war. But even though it may not be popular in this time, I'm here to say that Prince Alemayehu should stay at rest as an eternal symbol and landmark of Ethiopian and British history and ultimately friendship. Studying the life of Emperor Haileselassie in Ethiopia since my late teens, I was overwhelmed when I went to St George's Chapel in Windsor Castle. It is the home of the Knight of the Garter, and the Emperor's stool plate is still on display to this day. The icons in the church of St George's are black icons. The column where Prince Alemayehu is remembered is prominent and features a dual remembrance from Rastafari Makonnen and later Emperor Haileselassie. Windsor Castle, where St George's Chapel is situated, is where Rastafari Makonnen, echoing his father's memories, said that it was forever inscribed in his heart, and it was last visited by the Emperor, where he would have paid his respects to Prince Alemayehu in 1972, when Haileselassie stood with the now King Charles III. This is without a doubt the most historic religious building in this country, representing a relationship with the country of Ethiopia. As many know, Ethiopia and Britain are old acquaintances, and there is actually a family Solomonic connection on display for anyone versed in that tradition. And there is no better resting place to shine a light on all of this historical connection, including Meqdela, than St George's Chapel. The premier religious building for the British monarchy and the home of chivalry and knighthood in this country, which also relates us to ancient Ethiopian customs and traditions. Ethiopia has the oldest order of chivalry in the world. It is a place of faith of our shared most venerable patron saint, St George, and this is the place where, up to His Imperial Majesty Haileselassie, as Knight of the Garter in the 1970s, remembrances and prayers for Ethiopia have been held as organised by the British monarchy. Emperor Tewodros himself actually shared this dream of a relationship with Britain that eventually emerged, and we should not ignore this. History records from his own attitudes and from witness accounts the Emperor of Ethiopia entrusted his son to Britain. Do we respect the Emperor's decision? Emperor Menelik and Empress Taitu, who are our defiant anti-colonial heroes, gave Captain Speedy, the guardian of Alemayehu, a hero's welcome when he returned to Ethiopia, almost as an Ethiopian. Although his opinions and manner might be strange to us today, he was not vilified in the extreme by the emperors of Ethiopia in his time, and could be said to be an early 19th century example of an Ethiopianist. This should also make us pause to think. It is my opinion that it is a great honour that Prince Alemayehu was laid to rest in the high place of St George's Chapel, and fittingly Prince Alemayehu's birthday, as we've heard, is on St George's Day in the English calendar. Finally, I'm interested in those who are purposely left behind by Emperor Haileselassie. Why is it, as far as we are aware, in all those years from 1924 to 1972, the Emperor never sought the return of Alemayehu? Or in a different example, why did he not choose to repatriate his great servant, Dr. Malaku Bayem, who died and is buried in Harlem and stands as a beacon for Black America? Why was it necessary that Ethiopia's great intellectual who lived in this house, Blattengeta Heroi, returned to Ethiopian soil? I suggest that in the case of Dr. Bayen and Prince Alemayehu, even if it was not their dream to die far away in strange lands, these are the monuments of Ethiopia. Their struggles and experiences weren't in vain, and they are still serving their country at rest from afar today.
I personally agree with that wholeheartedly.
Yes.
Wholeheartedly.
While I respect the proposals that you made, in as far as Emperor Haileselassie was concerned, he didn't even repatriate the remains of his own daughter from Italy. That's a different kettle of fish. None of them shared the common denominator that Alemayehu has. Alemayehu was taken, like it or not, prisoner from Ethiopia. That is an insult to the intelligence of Ethiopians through generations. No Ethiopian royalty has been taken prisoner from Ethiopia and died abroad. No, mention one. All these guys. The matter is a matter of principle. The principle being, how does this generation of Ethiopians view Alemayehu? In what terms do they view? I can see, I understand, by reading your books, the circumstances that led. It could have been, there's a story that Tewodros might have said, please take care of my son.
But he killed himself. He killed himself.
But not in such a way. But one last thing that I was going to, this is a hypothetical question. What if Tewodros hadn't committed suicide? Would he have been taken prisoner?
Yes.
Yes.
Definitely.
Hold on. Would that not clash with the rules of engagement of the expeditionary force, which was to secure the release of the prisoners?
I'm sure they would have tried to kill him.
That doesn't work. That doesn't work for as far as Africa is concerned. To me, I don't think those people have got an option to leave. If they left Alemayehu at that situation, what could have happened to him? He should have been killed.
But Mashesha survived.
But Mashesha was in a different place.
He was in Meqdela.
Yeah, but nobody knew him.
Yeah.
Nobody knew
But I'm saying that there wasn't a plot. He survived and he thrived. He was a good friend of me, wasn't he?
What do you mean Mashesha? Nobody knew Mashesha. Of course they knew.
He was not in the house at the time.
Yeah, he was not. He was in a different part. But he still was the son of Tewodros. In fact, from the same aristocratic lineage as him.
But he has already escaped.
No, he was there at the time.
He's not under their control. Anyway. But this young boy is under their control.
Yeah, and I can see why they took him from.
Yeah.
But I think they should have had a more consistent plan for his life.
That is
endless chaos and change.
Look after
a new father figure. But it mustn't forget, he went to, from Britain's point of view, he went to the best British school. He holidayed with the Queen. He was treated as a prince. It's not it's not as simple as saying he was mistreated. But I just think ultimately there wasn't enough. He was overlooked. There wasn't enough thought put into his future.
Yeah, but he died alone.
So
when they took Alemayehu, they also took another man, known later as Hakim or Dr. Bati.
Yeah.
But he was always in India with the same kind of people.
If only Alemayehu had turned right and not left, gone to India.
If he had gone there,
he
might have been successful.
Yeah, he could have been ambassador. He could have gambled away the embassy for. Was that right?
That's what tells you that they purposely brought him here.
Well, I think that was Speedy. Speedy brought him here.
Yes. And also, I would like to discuss about the letter you read.
Yeah.
It's signed from Abyssinia. But no Ethiopian refers to Ethiopia as Abyssinia. So I suggest that letter was written by somebody English or somebody.
and put down Abyssinia. No one refers to Ethiopia as an Ethiopia.
Was that, did you see the words, or what I read out? The translation was some English guy's translation.
Yeah, the grandmother. She would not have put down
Abyssinia.
You can see the original.
So what was the term in those days? No? Ethiopia, even then?
Yes.
So the term Abyssinia was from outside maybe?
This is the original text, you can see what she wrote. And that's the translation I wrote.
Yes, we've got more questions coming if we have time. Is that all right? Do you want to take a couple of questions? Yeah? Do you want to come after that? Shall we take a couple of questions while they're reading? Yeah. All right. Jenny, yeah? No one.
Come back to the and I think I'm trying to say, as you without knowing the full history. But to me,
Jimmy, can you say again? Jimmy.
If he was taken by accident, as you were saying, it was like a mistake, he just happened to be taken back to Britain. I'm still trying to understand why there was not made any attempt, or maybe there was, to get him back to Ethiopia. Later, when he was in England for years, why not make some attempt to get him back? He had family, he had letters.
Well, so
what would happen if he went back to Ethiopia? Was that not a risk for Britain in some way?
Well, I think
if he went back to Ethiopia.
I think that, so Ethiopia, all down to Britain's attitude to Ethiopia. So as I said, after the campaign, Britain had had enough of Ethiopia. It withdrew the consul from Massawa, and it said our Abyssinian policy is to have no Abyssinian policy. So to plonk a prince back in is the ultimate interference, right? A prince from the last emperor. So I think it wasn't even thought of that they would get. Then obviously, I mean, the big sort of surprise at the end of the book is that I'd finished it, and then have you ever been on archive.org? It's an amazing website where basically you don't have to go to libraries anymore. They've scanned in every copyright-free book. And I was doing some word searches, and basically a folder of Foreign Office correspondence dropped out that I hadn't noticed, and it was letters between the British government and Gordon of Gordon of Khartoum before he was Gordon of Khartoum. Well, and he was sent on various expeditions to Abyssinia to test the waters and to see whether we had any allies against the other powers. And he had a letter saying, "What do you think about the possibility of Prince Alemayehu going back to Abyssinia?" That was written in early 1879. It got to him at the end of the year, and Gordon did some initial digging, and Emperor Johannes said no way, and other rebel figures said yes please, surprise surprise. But then the news of Alemayehu's death came, and Gordon wrote back saying, well, if he came back he'd probably be put in a golden cage by Emperor Johannes, but as the boy is dead the story's finished. So it shows that right at the last minute Britain was thinking, obviously scratching around for ideas about what to do with this boy. Someone thought, well, why don't we just send him back? Let's ask Gordon. And Gordon did a bit of initial research, and then Alemayehu died. So, yeah.
Interesting. Any more? Second?
Nowhere question? Mention Abyssinia.
No, so the original. So it's just the translation.
No, the original letter does not mention.
Okay, good.
Ethiopia or Abyssinia?
What did I say? Did I? Sorry.
More question. We've got one more question for the lady there.
Yes.
Can you start?
First, tell us a little bit about what motivated you to write this book, like what was the goal. Secondly, I was wondering, where's people in this room who know a lot about Ethiopian history, have an association with Black history perhaps internationally. How would you explain the story, or present a takeaway, a thesis of if his life in England to a classroom today, to a high school today? How could you make the story of Prince Alemayehu not relevant, something that tells us a little bit about the time in that period of the British history, about its values, about its sentiments of the time? What does this story tell somebody today who doesn't have any background?
Okay, oh God, I'd love to do that. I mean, I'm not a teacher, so I don't have those skills. But I think if I was in front of a classroom, I'd have two ambitions. The first one would be to make the children fall in love with Alemayehu, or to see him as a potential mate, as in a guy they could have hung out with at school, and to try and paint a picture of this boy who I find incredibly compelling. I really like Alemayehu. I hope I've got that. I hope I've got that over. About the attitudes, I wonder whether it's too simple for primary school. Maybe not. I think it's really interesting, this balance between how he was honoured and discriminated against. How he was put in the golden cage. So it's not as simple. He wasn't treated like dirt. He didn't have people tarring and feathering him, chasing him down the streets. He wasn't subjected to that kind of racism. He was subjected to the kind of racism where everyone looked at him all the time. He was an oddity. He was photographed at every opportunity. There were pictures of, in his early years in the Isle of Wight, of crowds gathering to look at him, and him scurrying away behind Captain Speedy, terrified. I just think it's, to be honest, I don't know, because I'm not a teacher, I wish I was, but if I could get over the fact that he was great and really a good guy, and it teaches us something about the nature of the British engagement with Africa, which wasn't simple black and white racism. It was something it was more insidious than that. It was a kind of a dangerous romance. We kind of fell for Ethiopia, Plowden and Bell, and me, when I went over as a foreign correspondent, we fell in love with the exoticism of it, and that kind of, there's something about sons, middle sons, younger sons from British families, trapped in a bit of a drab life in England. I'm the oldest son, by the way, and looking to reinvent themselves. And Africa and Ethiopia in that stage, it presented them as a stage to recreate themselves, which sounds great and exciting, but if you then form a drama in your own head and you force parts on the other people around you, so basically we went over there as adventurers, that didn't work out. We went over there as military conquerors, that worked out because we had better guns. Then we told ourselves that we were benevolent rescuers, and for that to be true, Alemayehu has to be a poor little African orphan victim who is beautiful but black, but not quite black. There are these people who are really into, what's that fake science? They were really into phrenology in those days, where they thought they could grade humanity by evolutionary facial features, So there are pages and pages written about Alemayehu's lips versus his the skin tone. So there was basically, we went over there as military campaigns. Then we rescued this little boy, which means we're benevolent rescuers, which means he's a little victim, which means we can pass him from father figure to father figure. So I just think that's a really interesting relationship. It's not baddies versus goodies. It's goodies thinking they're goodies, but dreaming up fantasies that do almost as much damage as a gun. It's kind of weird. And I think that is maybe an element of the empire understanding, and maybe at the heart of, exoticism, what's the phrase? Edward Said's Orientalism. This idea that we idealise, we as white people idealise the Ottoman Empire, we idealise Abyssinia, and that's great and exciting and flattering, but also dangerous. And I think that's what Alemayehu teaches us.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
And how I started the story, I've always been a journalist, apart from one period when I thought I would join the church, and I signed up to become the communications officer for the Scottish Episcopal Church, which is the Scottish Anglicans, the Church of England in Scotland. So I was their PR guy. And anyone here know Edinburgh? So Princes Street, the big shopping street, and on the west end with the castle up here, there are these two beautiful churches at the bottom, and one of them's an Episcopal church, an Anglican church. And the Reverend John, do you know the story about the Edinburgh Tabot?
Yes.
Yeah.
That was returned.
Yeah. So I was there, and John, the minister of the church there, was John McGluckie. He was bored one day, and he started digging around a cupboard, just looking for stuff, and he finds this case, Victorian case, with stamped on the leather, taken from Meqdela, 1868. So this is before I'd ever heard of it. he had done some, as a student, he'd come to Ethiopia to do some missionary stuff years ago, so he had a vague idea of what the Orthodox Church was and all that kind of stuff. But he Googled Meqdela and found the basics about the Battle of Meqdela and discovered that the object in this case was a tabot. You know, as I don't need to tell you what a tabot is. And his initial reaction was, okay, I'm going to put it in a jiffy bag and send it to the Ethiopian embassy in London. Because it's not mine. Without no debate, no theorising, he said, this isn't mine, it's not ours, it was taken in a battle, I don't want it, I want to give it back. So no big deal. He didn't want to make a fuss about it, he just wanted to send it back. So by the way, I think this is yours. And the embassy got back in touch and said, do you realise what a tabot is? Yes. You don't put a tabot in a jiffy bag. So, and then, I don't know if you saw the TV, I went down to Edinburgh's Waverley Station one morning in winter 2001. The train pulled in, and remember at this stage I'd grown up in Nigeria and Kenya and Egypt, but I didn't know anything. I knew nothing about Ethiopia apart from a kind of a romantic something about rock-hewn churches, something like that. I knew it was cool, but I didn't know anything about it. And this train pulled up in Waverley Station. Once the doors opened, the Archbishop of Axum and his entourage walked out onto a 20th century, onto a Scottish train platform. You know, black robes. My mind explodes. A delegation from the World Ethiopian Federation arrive. Congregations from London arrive in dressed beautifully, you know, white celebration. And then half the embassy from London come onto the platform. And they go to the church quickly to check it as a tabot, because there's this nightmare that we've brought them all this way for some random thing. And obviously I'm out of the picture here because I'm not ordained, so I didn't see any of it. But John McLaughlin takes them to as sacred a place as you can get in an Anglican church, because, you know, we're not quite into this symbolism. Yeah. Opens a safe in the vestry, shows them the tabot. They burst into song. And then the next morning, at 6 o'clock in the morning, until the early hours of the afternoon, this part, I don't know, what part Ethiopian Orthodox Mass, part party, part national celebration, part bog standard, for me, bog standard Anglican communion service. And St John's is for the establishments. It's basically all the colonels and Lord Mayors and magistrates. They're in the congregation. So basically loads of guys in suits and tweed skirts, Rastafarians in the background, the Orthodox Archbishop of Axum here, and every Ethiopian in Scotland has come to Edinburgh because finally they've got someone to baptise their kids, right? And so there's a paddling pool here where Ethiopian babies are being baptised. Wow. And this goes on for hours, like 8 hours.
8 hours. Wow.
Incredible. 2001. And I'm just sitting there with the world's press in the top balcony watching this thing, and they keep on saying, "Where's the tabot?" Because they don't realise that it's, you know, by this stage it's in someone's, you know. And so to cut a long story short, my mind exploded, and the whole universe opened up to me, and I gave up my idea of becoming a vicar, and remembered that I quite enjoyed being a journalist. And so, first of all, got into AFRAMET, you know, the Association for the Return of Magdalene Ethiopian Treasures, which introduced me to the Pancras, which introduced me to Ras Seymour MacLean from the World Ethiopian Federation. And then we went over to Ethiopia for a holiday and climbed Meqdela. Mind explodes again. Who's been up Meqdela here?
Hey,
it's just seriously, everyone go up Meqdela when it's a bit more secure. It's just
a challenge for all of us. It's a challenge for all of us.
Yeah. We're going to climb it. Yes, we'll do it. Like, you know, the Grand Canyon in America lives up to its reputation. Meqdela exceeds its reputation. It's just stunning. And then went back as a journalist. I found out all about Tewodros II on T-shirts, posters, murals, and found out that he'd been very well covered, lots of books, and the military expedition very well covered, lots of books. Then I found out about this little boy who, apart from this book, which sounds great, as far as I can tell, hadn't been.
There's Alemayehu, and this is still Alemayehu. You don't come across it. Mainly it's the Tewodros often.
Yeah, and then there's a little footnote. Oh, by the way, his son, by the way, he died quickly. Yeah.
We've got another question.
Andrew, thank you for this. I just wonder whether you had any encounter with the royal house. With regards to some facts, which were you prohibited sharing with the public? Was it a coincidence now, Prince Charles and the royal house raising the fact just after you published?
No, I think what happened there is, I've got it here. So I got in with these, I really want to publish my book in Ethiopia. So I was contacting publishers there, and what are they called? There's this little publishing house which is doing some really cool things, and I got in touch with them, and they happened to be mates with the BBC Amharic team in Nairobi. And one of them was here and took back a copy of my book to them. It passed on to the BBC Amharic team in Nairobi. They then did a story. They then went up to Simeon Mountains and found descendants of Alemayehu, and who said Alemayehu should come back. They did a story, putting my book 2/3 of the way down, very unfairly, and that kicked off the whole thing. So it wasn't a coincidence, nor was it a plot. And I hadn't got any secret information from the royal family.
Were you sanctioned?
No. I think the royal family. My best guess is that it's a very similar situation in a way between Alemayehu and the Tabot in Westminster Abbey. There's what Tabot in Westminster Abbey, stuck on the back of an altar, which used to be on public display. And Westminster Abbey and St George's Chapel are both royal peculiars, which means the royal family get to say. And for me, the Tabot in Westminster Abbey is just a no-brainer. It's a Christian building. It's an altar is the focus of worship. Why do you have an item of stolen property as the focus of your worship? Never mind the fact that it's a Tabot. And they say, the implication I get is they don't want to return the Tabot because they don't want to destroy the altar, which is only a 20th century thing. It's nothing special. But I think the kind of mindset that is against that, which is kind of small c conservative, we must conserve heritage, we mustn't break an altar in Westminster Abbey, I think is the similar kind of small c conservatism behind we must not break open a grave, even though royal bodies have been moving left, right and centre for centuries. The Queen's mother-in-law, her body was moved from London to Jerusalem several years after her death. So there's nothing wrong with moving bodies. But personally, I think the royal family are a beneficial force in this. They have looked after what they've got, and if you could find ways of reaching out to them and finding common ground, and I thought what you said was beautiful. I think there's a whole debate. What you said was beautiful too. I think there's a real debate to be had. But I think there must be some kind of middle ground, somewhere where, like the Edinburgh Tabot was a win-win situation.
Yeah.
That corner of Edinburgh is in love with Ethiopia. The people in Ethiopia who remember that event are in love with Edinburgh. If the future independent Scotland ever wants to have a relationship with one of the fastest growing economies in the emerging economies, they can say, by the way, we gave you that Tabot back in 2001. Can you solve this trade deal? And they'll do it. So there must be some way of bringing everyone on board, having win-win situations.
I now understand when my grandfather's body was taken from here to be sent to Ethiopia, there was a big service at the Westminster Abbey before his body was put on the train to fly from Southampton. I've always questioned why was he given service at Westminster Abbey. Now I can relate.
Because it's a royal peculiar, another royal church.
Because we have Tabot there.
Oh, maybe that was it too.
I see.
Yeah.
Interesting. Just one more. Sorry, you have a question?
Did you?
No question.
I think I have a relative.
Okay, just to introduce, madam. What was your name again? I beg your pardon. What was your? ይቅርታ ስሞት ማን ነበር? የእርሱ ጊዜው አያለው. So we have a Gisho Ayalo lady here. Maybe you are the 5th generation from Tewodros.
Alemayehu, his sister is he has sister.
Yes.
Her name is called Atash.
From a different father.
She was married
from a different mother.
Menelik, as a Menelik.
She was the first wife of Menelik, Emperor Menelik.
Yes, first wife Menelik. and after he got a position, he did not been long. And Alemayehu had 3 children.
Yes.
And which is Makonnen, Wayan, and Dajjazmash Balai. Dajjazmash Balai is my mama.
Wow. So you are the what? How many?
Tewodros.
Cousin, yes.
Some kind of
I'm the 5th child of Tewodros.
The 5th
grandchild.
5th grandchild of Tewodros. Wow, and that is her 2 children. That's a historical mom here. It's amazing. And you came from London as well today,
yes,
for this moment. Incredible. That's amazing.
We would like to say to you thank you, really, you for a lot of things you have done. I see, even though when we saw with my children, here when we go back to Ethiopia, really thank you, all of you, Brother Brigade, I see everything. God bless you.
Thank you so much. We're going to wrap up fairly soon.
Yeah, so a guy from Leeds, right? I've only heard one, so it'd be great to hear them.
Yeah?
Oh, I'd love to hear more, but yeah.
Definitely.
I can't remember the sources in Africa, but I'll check it. It's interesting. There's something on the people that he wanted to turn to be creative.
Right. Oh, can I get the details from you later? Because I'd love to hear them. I've heard one song, one folk song.
Yeah.
Sorry? Right.
Chris is a member of the
Yeah.
So he's around here, so we can get stuff.
He cooked the amazing food.
Yeah, he's the one who's cooked us.
Yeah, thank you very much.
No, that's great. We have an amazing person at the back, Gashindra. Surely you've got something to ask. Gashindra, you have anything to ask?
Come to the front. I can't hear you.
Stay there if you want. Yella? Come on.
Andrew, I just wanted to share you about the problem that the Ethiopian Orthodox Church has encountered following the return of the tablet from Edinburgh.
Oh dear. Okay.
6 hours it took the tablet from the airport to the cathedral, Trinity Cathedral.
Yeah.
Both sides of the driveway were crowded with people reception.
Yeah. Oh, this is a good problem. I thought it was a bad problem.
No. This was good for Ethiopia.
Yeah.
But the British Museum didn't like it. What the British Museum want is a hush-hush.
Yeah.
The director of the British Museum went to Ethiopia and spoke to the late Patriarch Aulos on this guard. And he said, we don't want to open the floodgates for more items to go back to their origins.
Yeah.
We can give you tomorrow morning the 10 tablets that we have.
But just don't tell anyone.
But don't
keep it huge.
This is dictation that we will not accept.
That's insane.
Insane.
Well, I mean, for me, sorry, how are we doing for time? The tablets are the ultimate absurdity. So obviously not the tablets, but you know what I mean, the situation of the tablets. So there are 10 tablets in the British Museum. They understand that they're sacred and that they shouldn't look at them or put them on display or touch them or study them or do anything with them. So they put them in a locked room, covered up in something, and promise never to look at them again. So basically, there's this kind of little vacuum, this little limbo in the British, a little bit of the British Museum that no one can go to.
You can't display it.
Yeah, there's no.
Doesn't make sense. No, it doesn't make sense.
And then the one in the back of the Altar Westminster Abbey, they said we won't hide it, but we'll cover it up, so it's hidden inside this altar. Sorry.
Okay, Israel, I want to ask something now. Gosh, I have someone you minimum. The 6th generation should, yes. Did you ask what come now? I didn't see this now. There will be the 6th generation, yes. No, not your children. So, one second. Just introducing. Oh, brilliant! I think I'll do one more thing. This is incredible. Rashida, we talked about this earlier. Couple of things. Good. So yeah. So the story then goes on. The story of this really continues. It's important history in Ethiopia. Never dies. Still, it lives on. So for those who stay here, never mind here. But Emperor. But Emperor Johannes. This is it during Emperor Johannes. This is the emperor comes after Tewodros. He writes a letter to Britain, to Queen Victoria, and he asks in the letter he asks for two things. So he wants these two things to be returned. The first thing he asks is the the book of Kebun-Agast. And the second thing he asks is the famous
Rousseau.
Yes, Kurateras, the very famous image of it was lost in those days. And I think they couldn't find. I think the Queen Victoria, everyone, they find one copy and send back to him.
As Ross Benji was saying. They quickly returned it.
They quickly found them because Emperor Johannes says, without this book, without this image, no one is going to govern. No one is going to listen to me as an emperor. So it's important we have this book because the book has already been taken. This book is important. So then quickly signed. I think they've taken two. They've taken one quickly to him, but the image nowhere to be found. They couldn't find. They couldn't send it.
University.
But now, so let's see. So here's the question. So the question is to Andrew. What do we know about this? Where are we with this story?
So just about that, lots of people often say that we shouldn't return treasures because the countries that made them don't know how to look after their own things. Okay, they often say that Ethiopia, if you return these, the British Museum has done a wonderful job looking after the manuscripts, and if we send them back to Ethiopia, the Ethiopians wouldn't know how to look after their own manuscripts. Okay. So the Book of Kebun-Agast, Emperor Johannes asks for it back. It goes. As far as I can tell, it went back to Ethiopia, and we all know that quite a lot happened in Ethiopian history after that. Lots of turmoil in various ways. Just a few weeks ago, my friend Alula Pankhurst and some other people went to what's the name of the church? Raguel Church in Toto, just above Addis Ababa.
This is new, fresh news.
And can you see this?
You can't quite see it, but the book has been displayed.
So basically, if
Allah is there in the image.
So the Kebun-Agast is still there in perfect condition in Raguel Church, and you can tell it's the actual one because the British Museum, I didn't do it. I was born in 1970. But when the British troops got the manuscripts, first of all, they scrawled in pencil Gospel of Matthew or something.
Yeah.
Then it was taken by the Indian in the office. They stamped property of the Indian office. Then it was presented to the British Museum. The British Museum got a big red stamp onto this vellum stamped British Museum on every 20th page. And then the British Museum turned into the British Library. But no, that's history. So the Kebun-Agast is covered in British Museum stamps, as is this one. And then I love the fact that the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, when they received it, doubled up the stamps. So if you look at the page, there's for every British Museum stamp, there's 2 blue stamps. But anyway.
But the church has one as well.
But this is it. This is the one.
Not Rugby. I mean the patriarch, the head office.
The head office.
Without that, they could not sit in the Holy Synod.
But this was the copy that Emperor Johannes asked for back, and then against character, Britain said, "Yep, sure," gave it back within a matter of months, and it's in perfect condition. In fact, it looks like it's been rebound. But it looks,
This is important. This is really fascinating.
This is the. You need it, but it's an answer to say. Manuscript seems to do quite well.
Right. And how about the image?
The image, I know exactly where it is, but it's
called Kurateras.
Curateras.
It
is
in Portugal.
So beautiful, this image.
Is it in Portugal, or was it?
The finding you here now.
2-3 years ago, it was in one of the colleges in Oxford.
No, well, it is. I've really missed a big thing, but as far as I can...
They probably
It may have been on loan.
It was stolen by the British Museum's expert on the expedition. So he stole everything, but he stole this particularly for himself, kept it above his bed in his bedroom. Yes. As he was getting older, he was so desperate to show off this treasure, so he got a journalist to write it up in an art magazine. When he died, it was auctioned off to someone, and there's this esoteric argument about whether it's a Flemish or a Portuguese painting, because it's from the Renaissance.
Beautiful paint.
It's stunning. And this Portuguese art expert, who was convinced it was of the Portuguese tradition, bought it, took it to... He was a New York professor. When he died, his widow took it back to Portugal, and it's in a bank vault just outside Lisbon, still wrapped in the newspapers from 1965 when it was last auctioned.
So it has a meaning. This picture has... Do you know the meaning of this image? Maybe you know?
Yeah.
The meaning of this... Can you explain the actual meaning of the picture?
Christ our Savior.
Yes.
With
the crown of thorns.
But there's a meaning. Gashilva. Mr. Nigoran. So, Igwa is elderly member of our community. He studied theology in Egypt in those days. So he will know a lot about this image. So he's going to try to explain what it means. So I want you to listen about this. Trust the yellow buttons. Does that matter? Is it mute? Is it okay now? So, Ezra quickly is going to explain the meaning of that image.
What Curateris?
Curateris.
Curateris is a crown of thorns.
Crown of thorns?
Yes. And that's a very important symbol. And in Ethiopian biblical explanation, it's not only thorns, plants, but the actual is made of iron, metal. It's not on 1020, it's about 600 thorns. It's very useful. It is the whole burden of his Jesus Christ is symbolized in the crown of thorns. Eventually, that was the last humiliation, and also the last what Christianity actually was symbolized as pain and at the same time of revelation. What it is.
So in meaning of Amharic, Quran.
Ru'us.
Yes, yes.
Yes. It is Buddhist.
Just tell us the definition.
It actually means something which hits the head. Qur'at.
Struck his head.
Kurkum. Qur'at. Ru'us. Yes, crown of thorns. And then you've got the symbol, add up things onto it theologically. That's what it is.
Thank you very much.
We were led to believe that Emperor Tewodros was at loggerheads with Ethiopian priests.
Yeah.
Primarily because he cut the festivals and told them to abide by that. And yet, we see his personal worship and glorification of God Almighty. So much so that one of the orders of Ethiopia is the order of Trinity, Haileselassie order. Emperor Haileselassie had created the order of Menelik, the order of Solomon, the order of Saba. But the order of Trinity, Selassie, is that of Tewodros, which is fantastic, which the emperor wanted to give to Sir John Russell, who was Ethiopian, British ambassador to Addis during the Queen's visit in 1965.
Oh, right.
But the Foreign Office stopped it. Yes.
Why?
You couldn't give the order. You have to explain who created the order and this and that. And the Emperor Tewodros' name was there. So he instead got the Order of the Star of Ethiopia.
Okay. Interesting.
He was a remarkable fellow. He's always been my hero.
We had to memorize when we were, those of us who were educated a little bit older.
Who hasn't?
We had to memorize. I mean, my generation, we had to memorize tables when I was studying Amharic anyway.
Arya was the book.
Arya, now the good, the poet, there was a big poet, monarch, it's a whole book in poem, and it was the most fantastic sort of poetry.
Oh, okay.
And we had to memorize it, I remember.
Memorize the whole thing. Something you're grateful for later.
Yeah, let's memorize. I've got something to tell you. I read somewhere. I read somewhere. I think it was in that little book that I read.
Madame de Bonfoy. Madame de Bonfoy, ታስታውሳለህ?
Madame
de Bonfoy.
I'll say something quickly.
Can I just tell you this story? It's a very interesting thing. Sorry, I'm itching to say. It was you were finishing when I started.
No.
So, I read this in this book again, this adjustment of somebody who wrote it. And apparently, when Prince Alemayehu was buried in Windsor, and after that there were skirmishes for territory. So the British came, as you know, they were always trying anyway to get to Ethiopia. So they came via Somalia when they conquered Somalia, when they put Somalia. And at that time Somalia wasn't there, it was all Ethiopian land. But there were tribes, and the tribes always account the king, whoever is sovereign. People are independent in their own reign, but they acknowledge whoever is the reign at that time. I don't know who it was, I'm sorry in my history, but what happened was they came down from Somalia, going up through, wanting to come up to Harar, because that's easier terrain than the north. And then the Somalian chiefs came to the king, and I forgot this king, I don't know if it's I don't know, but they came, or whether it's Melik, I don't know, but they came and they said, look, these British are disturbing us, they're taking our land. So they were going, just putting the flag and saying this is the land of the Queen, there's nobody living there, as usually there are nomads, there's nobody here. So at the time the king said they were fighting in different parts of Ethiopia, so it must be because they're honest, because there were different things happening. The port, the Ottomans are there from Egypt, there was from the Red Sea, things are happening, so they couldn't really focus all the way down there. So they said, look, you deal with them. And they couldn't, so they kept saying this is our territory, putting territories and pushing it and pushing it. So apparently the king said, look, why don't you say this is our country and make a demarcation yourself as well? And then the minute they pass that, then you've got cause for war. Right? Nobody wanted to start the first war. So they felt a bit disappointed in terms of the Somalian chiefs. They felt they were sort of left out, and I think that was they were a bit disgruntled about it. But they were saying it's a tactical thing, because now if I say to you, that's your land, it's Somaliland, before the British say it's Somaliland, then they are invading somebody's territory, and then we can come to help you, right? And then what happened was they said, well, there were some skirmishes and some British soldiers died, and they said, wherever a British person dies, it's the Queen's land or something like that.
Right.
That effect, you know what they said. And there was a big argument going on. So they said, okay, in some of the letters, this to and fro from the king and stuff, they said, all right, the letters are written in Amharic or Ge'ez, and then another translation. So the translations are always not the right translations. But what happened was, they know that Prince Alemayehu was buried in Windsor, right? So they put a claim. So the British put a claim saying the king has agreed that we own all this land. Wherever a British person dies, that's our land. So when they look at the translation, it's a different translation, obviously, helping the British. So they said, fine, we agree with that. Because the British forgot that Prince Alemayehu was in Windsor. Right? So after that, they said, okay, now we put a claim to that as much territory that you're taking, that will have reciprocal.
That's brilliant.
Reciprocal, yeah. So I wanted to get this, I'm sure I read it in this book this gentleman
What was it right again?
Gurbacho Taklariat.
That's a great story.
Fitarari had to give this much.
I need to get that.
So I would personally interested if you find something like that.
Can I just do one thing?
Just before we finish,
Yeah.
we have the shop. Andrew's book is in the shop, and he will do a quick sign on
I'll
your
sign
book.
anything.
Before we go, the book will be signed. The shop is there if you want to buy the book as well. I'm just trying to remind before we go that's to take place.
Okay.
So Andrew, yeah, come on.
Okay, can I just say thank you very much for listening and for being here so long. And as a reward, as a present to you, I want to share one last object, which is my favourite portrait of Alemayehu. So remember, he just landed in Britain, 1868, and he got on within days he was put on a steam train, which must have been exciting, terrifying, whatever. He stopped off at Exeter St David's train station because in those gauges you have to keep on changing tracks. He was going to go to the Isle of Wight, so he had about an hour to wait in a waiting room in Exeter St David's train station, and a journalist from the local Exeter newspaper was also an artist and did a quick sketch of him. And so this is the sailor's hat he'd worn on the steamship across the Mediterranean. This is him all dressed up with a bouquet of flowers to meet Queen Victoria. And I think you have to get your comfort and where you can in his story. And I just think he's, I think that's a beautiful picture. So let's remember him like that. And and thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That's amazing. Thank you. That was fantastic.
Thanks very much.
That's Qur'an is. It's not an original.
Sorry?
Qur'an is not an original. It's not an original, is it? Picture. The Qur'an is.
No, because I think